So Chair Esquivel, at this point in time, we're streaming live and you should be able to start the meeting whenever you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Loffer. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Wednesday, November 4th, and it is 9:30 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues with me here today. With me today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Laurel Firestone, Board Member Tam Dodak, and Board Member Sean McGuire. Additionally, we have with us Eileen Sobek, our Executive Director, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer, our two Chief Deputies, Eric Oppenheimer and Jonathan Bishop. With us today is Janine Townsend, our Clerk of the Board, and assisting her is Margie Argel. As you can see, today's meeting is being webcast and recorded. You have two options there. You're either viewing us through the webcast on the Cal EPA website or YouTube Live, or if you're looking to provide a comment today, you should be here on the Zoom platform. In order to comply with the governor's executive orders and social distancing requirements, we don't have a physical meeting room. So again, if you are looking to comment, you should have and can follow the instructions at the top of today's agenda, or you can email comment letters at waterboards.ca.gov, and Janine Townsend can help you get signed in. With that, and again, when you will remain muted and your camera likely off. And when you are called up to speak, please do state your name and or affiliation and speak clearly into your microphone or phone. With that, I think, here, let me make sure I look at my script really quick. Yeah, with that, I think we're ready to move on to public forum. And I believe we have two commenters this morning looking to speak during public forum. And the first will be Bill Cooper from the Kern River Parkway Foundation. And I think he's here as William Cooper on the item. Good morning, Mr. Cooper.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning, Chairman Esquivel and members of the State Water Resources Conservation Board. My name is Bill Cooper. I'm a lifelong resident of Bakersfield and in Kern County. I'm a co-founder and current president of the Kern River Parkway Foundation, which is a recognized 501c3 public nonprofit based in Bakersfield since 1985. Our mission is simply to develop and promote the urban Kern River Parkway through Bakersfield. Before 1985, we started as the Kern River Parkway Committee back in 1974. Many of our members are still active. That gives us a total of about 45 years of activities in regards to our urban river. The foundation has a long record of cooperation and accomplishments with the city of Bakersfield for advocating for the reasonable management and development of a plan for the urban river through Bakersfield. Luckily for us, the city acquired the Tenneco water rights back in 1976, and this gave impetus to the development of the Kern River Parkway Plan, which has always been our overriding goal. We quickly developed the Kern River Plan element, which is a element to both the city and the county's general plans to guide the development along the Kern River through the urban area. It's identical to both plans and cannot be changed by either entity without their consent. We advocated for an environmental study of riparian land through the city, which the city acquired with those water rights. They did so, and with an extensive EIR, which led to their channel maintenance plan and to the creation of the Kern River Parkway Plan, which is what we had worked for many years. Bakersfield's urban Kern River Parkway now has 8 city-owned parks along it, a 35-mile Class 1 bike path, over 35 miles of equestrian and access to the open areas. There has been considerable retail development and residential development along this corridor. It's very popular. Future plans with the city include expanding the bike path, which is ongoing right now. It's one of the best in the state. Future residential developments will hopefully cluster their requirements along the corridor. I want to add that just this year, we worked with the county, and the county developed its own Kern River Parkway plan on its county-owned land along the urban area, the urban river. And we now have one of the largest regional parkways in the entire state based on the urban Kern River. Now, the only thing missing in all of this, of course, is the water. And like I said, in '76, the city acquired the Tenneco water rights and the associated land. We're still waiting to see that water show up in our urban area. You are all aware of the political and legal entanglements regarding that issue, which leads me to where I am, why I'm here today. Almost a decade ago, it was determined that the Kern Delta Water District, located in Kern County, had no demonstrable beneficial use of a significant amount of its Kern River water. And it was determined that your board would review this issue and make a decision regarding the assignment of that forfeited water. So the Kern River Parkway Foundation recommends that your board accept and approve the City of Bakersfield's 2015 water availability analysis and also its subsequent 2019 supplement to that analysis. And that the board find and determine that any and all water above the Kern Delta forfeiture caps is unappropriated water, which has a range of the amount of about a little over 13,000 acre feet of water per year in dry years to as much as 121,000 plus acre feet of water in wet years. So we request that the State Water Resources Control Board accept and approve the City of Bakersfield's application to appropriate that water, which application calls for the use of all unappropriated Kern River water to increase and enhance Kern River flows through our city limits. The Parkway Foundation recognizes that the City of Bakersfield's Water Resources Department has the infrastructure, including recharge capabilities, as well as the expertise to properly manage this water for all our community, from ag use to urban uses. We respectfully request that the board consider the assignment of this water to the City of Bakersfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Really appreciate you coming to address the board today and for your advocacy. I don't think the board is yet ready to say much about the Kern River or this project, but I appreciate and will just flag for staff that I'll want to, and note that at our last board meeting, we had a really great group of folks from Bakersfield coming from the community to talk to us about the river. And so just to flag for our staff that I'll be interested just to hear additionally from water rights staff where things sort of are. But thank you, Mr. Cooper. Really appreciate you flagging things today for us. Next in public forum here, we have Chris Milan, and it looks like he's from the Institute for Conservation Advocacy, Research, and Education.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Good morning, Ms. Milan.
Hi, yes, I'm Chris Malin.
Oh, Malin.
Yes, and I am the Executive Director of the Institute for Conservation Advocacy, Research, and Education, and we've been a major player in the Napa River watershed in terms of biological monitoring with benthic macroinvertebrates from 2000 to current, and we're getting ready to do another total basin bioassessment in collaboration with the Region 2 Water Board, Kevin Lundy. I've been in conversations with Kevin Lundy for, sorry about that, for a couple of years over the nutrient TMDL, which you actually, I think you delisted it last week at your last board meeting, but it was listed in 1988 for nutrients, and then the delisting came up, but then it was listed again in 2016, again for nutrients, but again in the tidal reach instead of the freshwater reach. We also have a listing for pathogens that started. Oh man, that phone, I'm so embarrassed. Trying to turn it off and it won't turn off. So anyway, the pathogens is only getting worse. It's not getting better, and it's still listed. The sediment just got a TMDL implementation plan with Mike Napolitano, who did a really good job with working with the stakeholders in the Napa. And we've got the first what was it called? Oh, well, anyway, we got an implementation plan with Sonoma and Napa. It's supposed to start, the program is supposed to start soon. And I think it started like a month ago, 2 months ago. The fires in 2017 delayed the implementation plan. My concern is, and the reason I'm coming before you is we have a terrible flow issue in the Napa. I've been monitoring it just by visually going out and looking at the riverbed. And I started that in 2005 and basically did it with our board members. And we've been kayaking from Calistoga to Napa. And we ended up pulling our kayak most of the way along the riverbed, and we would get stretches of flow. But in 2017, we did it again, and it was much, much worse. We were pulling our kayak through stagnant pools and many, many stretches of dry riverbed. Last year, I did spot checks, and most of the riverbed is dry. There were some intermittent pools, but they were very stagnant. And I started again yesterday, and I was shocked. It's heartbreaking. The amount of dry riverbed and the stagnation in the pools is much worse, and the pools are much smaller. So I'm very alarmed by the fact that, and you stand on the riverbed and you could kill yourself because it's so deeply incised. It's like 50 feet down to the river, and it's very inaccessible to the public. It should be called the Lost River instead of the Napa River. It's so deeply incised, and the water is going away, and people can't see it, and they don't. It's hard to realize that this public resource is vanishing within my generation, because I came here in 1970 and my kids were swimming in the river, and that's impossible now. So I'm going to keep coming before you. I'm devastated. I'm upset because the Napa River watershed has been burnt so badly. Much of the watershed has been burned by the devastating fires, and our watersheds are they're at cumulative impacts one could not imagine. And I think we have to be so serious about taking care of this problem and getting our flows going. That's going to help our rivers. I'm also the chair of the North Coast Stream Flow Coalition, and we had our meeting last week, and the members of that are 18 up and down from San Francisco Bay to the Oregon border, and their flows are terrible also. And I know that Daniel Schultz came from the Water Board and spoke with the North Coast stakeholders and informed them that he was concerned about flows and that they were thinking of implementing the California Environmental Flow Framework with the new guidelines coming out. He was wanting to try that on the North Coast. And he met with the stakeholders and told them that there could be a reduction in allowable extractions from their water permits. So, but the Water Board also stated, Daniel said that they weren't going to take strong enforcement positions because they felt people were too traumatized from COVID and other things, and that people couldn't take being enforced. So I'm paraphrasing a bit what he said, but you get the point. So anyway, I'm determined to keep coming before you because I think you need to see what is going on. It's when you're a board member and you sit in those seats, you get the staff reports, but what's actually happening in the field is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. We're losing our public trust resource in a very short generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malin, for taking the time this morning and for your continued advocacy. I believe that concludes public forum at this time. And so thank you again for those that have taken time this morning to address the board. Next, that brings us to our first item on the agenda here, which is consideration of adoption of the October 20th, 2020 board meeting minutes. And I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to adopt.
Second.
Great. And Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Certainly.
Stupid phone won't turn off.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Dodek,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well, Ms. Townsend. Yet again, very close. The board meeting minutes were almost not adopted, but I was glad we were able to pull together for it. Next, we have our uncontested item number 2, which is consideration of a proposed resolution authorizing the executive director or designee to execute a grant agreement for work to remediate sedimentation in the Elk River. Just want to thank and acknowledge staff's good work on it. It is, I believe, still currently uncontested, Ms. Townsend.
Yes, it is.
In that case, would entertain a motion, or if one would like to hear the item, we could also pull it.
I'll move for adoption unless someone wants to hear the item.
Hearing none. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. Ms. Townsend, can you please call the roll call vote?
Board Member Dodek,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
and Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. And the vote carries, and item number 2 is adopted. Thank you again for staff. Great work on the item. And so we now brings us to our 3 informational items. The first being an update on item number 3, which is an update on the board's actions and responses to COVID-19.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel and board members. We have 2 parts to the COVID update today. So we're going to start with an update from the team that's working on the survey of water systems. To give you a good update, we've made a lot of progress, I think, in the last week. And so this will be a good opportunity to really get a sense of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. When that is over, I'd like to introduce the second part, which is, I think as many folks know, there's the governor stood up a very robust COVID contact tracing program and has pulled employees from all over the state, including from the water boards. And I wanted to just talk about that a little bit. And we're going to have 2 individual water board employees who have spent the last few months working on that, letting you know what it's been like for them and for the rest of the team. But we're going to start out with the survey presentation, and Max Gomberg is going to start us off.
I'm actually going to let Jim start us off, and then I will take it away from there.
So I just very quickly wanted to introduce Mr. Gomberg and Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Gomberg and Mr. McCarthy have been our team leads on putting together the requested survey that the board requested. It's been, we've been diverting resources as we told you we would do to make this a top priority emergency. And Mr. Gomberg will kind of go through some of the details, and Mr. McCarthy will end with just telling you where we at on team status ready to launch into the work. So I'll get out of the way and let Mr. Gomberg begin. Thank you.
Ms. Townsend, can you put up the slides? Excellent. So good morning, Chair Esquivel, board members. As Darren and Eileen mentioned, we're making progress. I'm going to run through where we are and what the plan is. Next slide. So as we've discussed at prior meetings, we're really concerned about two impacts in the drinking water sector resulting from COVID and the economic recession the state is facing. And so they're listed here in the two boxes. We're worried about water systems, particularly smaller and even some mid-sized water systems that are experiencing significant revenue declines and may face financial crisis in the coming months if those revenue decline trends continue. At the same time, we're also highly concerned about household debt. With the shutoff moratorium in place, there are households that have been experiencing hardships, economic hardships, health hardships over the past many months now, and they are not paying their water bills. We're seeing delinquency rates go up significantly anecdotally and from data that's already been submitted to the Public Utilities Commission. And so the real concern is that there's a lot of debt accumulation going on, which could lead to shutoffs once the moratorium is lifted. And so we're aiming to really understand how much debt at the household level is being accumulated, and then the distribution of that debt. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Next slide. So as we've discussed, we've got a really robust survey effort that we're about to launch next week. And the goals of that effort are really to understand those two pieces at a statewide level and with some granularity. So we really want to understand across the water systems in the state what portion of them are potentially facing financial crisis, what's the magnitude of that crisis in dollars, and that will help us really think about emergency response potential actions to maintain water system operations. At the same time, we're trying to accomplish a statewide look at household debt due to non-payment of water bills, and again, look at the distribution of that debt, where it's concentrated, how many households have some debt versus a lot of debt. And what we hope to accomplish through this data collection effort is really to have really sound statewide estimates that will then inform those who may be in a position to make decisions about financial assistance at the state or federal level, emergency response, and other options for trying to minimize the impacts of COVID on our drinking water systems and on how economically challenged households. Next slide. So the survey that is going out next week, I mentioned we're looking at small and medium-sized systems for their financial impacts. And you can see the basics of the design and methodology on this slide. We are looking to get an 80% response rate. That is much higher than a traditional survey. And Sean McCarthy is going to talk about how we're going to do that in a minute. But we're going to expend a lot of resources reaching out to water systems to make sure we get a good response rate. You can see we're going to target 500 of them. And try to get a minimum of 400 responses. And that will give us a pretty good confidence level when we extrapolate those results statewide. Next slide. What are we asking in this survey? We're basically looking at the big financial picture. What is it that has happened in terms of their operating budgets since March 4, which was the declaration of the state of emergency, and the date after which any customer had to have their service restored if it had been shut off between March 4 and April 2. And then what do they have on hand, reserves, loans, anything that can help get them through the pandemic. And then, of course, the critical piece of information we're trying to obtain here is to understand how many systems are in or facing financial crisis and how many months they can continue to sustain operations with current revenue and expense trends. Next slide. For the household debt, for that statewide estimate, we're really looking at the larger systems in the state. Again, we're looking for a very high response rate. It's a smaller number of systems, but they serve the majority of the state's population. And we will make the survey available to all of the systems with over 10,000 service connections if they want to respond. And again, we're going to be asking questions specific to household debt for these systems. Next slide. So for these systems, as I've mentioned, what we're really trying to do is build an understanding of what household debt looks like at a statewide level, and to understand how it's distributed. So we want to know not only how many accounts are and how many households are delinquent. We want to know how much debt they've accumulated since March, and we want to know where that debt is concentrated and how it's distributed. You can see we're also asking about things like late fees to understand which systems are applying late fees to unpaid bill amounts and which aren't. What options have already been provided to struggling households in terms of extended repayment plans. We also, the bottom bullet here is an important one. We want, to the extent possible, to understand for systems that charge for more than just drinking water on the water bill. It might be drinking water and wastewater or water and power. There are a lot of things that go on to a water bill. If we can understand the portion of the accumulated debt that is related to drinking water service, we want to understand that as well. But we're really sort of keying in on the total water bill debt because that's what matters when it comes to the potential for shutoffs. Next slide. So here is the timeline. We're on an ambitious schedule to make sure we have a really well-established and well-analyzed data set by the end of the year so we can report back in January. And as you can see, we've got essentially a 2-week window starting next week for these surveys to go out and for us to gather responses. And we will report to the board at the first December board meeting where we are in terms of the response rate. So we can decide if any additional actions or resources need to be taken depending on the responses we get through November. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sean McCarthy, who's going to talk in a little bit more detail about how we're going to administer the survey.
Yes, thanks, Max. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. As Max summarized over our survey development process, over the last 3 weeks, we've moved very quickly with a team of staff within DDW and Max's group within ORPP, developing a list of randomly selected systems to ask for the survey, the questions for the survey, and working out the logistics for processing the survey forms. We're preparing the notices to send out to the water systems right now that they'll be included in a phone survey that will be done over the next 2.5 weeks by DDW staff within our field offices. We do have a number of small water systems under the county jurisdictions that are included in the survey, and these are small water systems that DDW staff are not familiar with. So to increase that response rate for the survey from those small systems, earlier this week, we asked those counties help in making the first contact with those water systems. And I learned yesterday some counties have already begun making that outreach. And so with all of this work now complete, we've reached the point where we can roll out the survey to our district offices, our staff at a staff training tomorrow afternoon, and we're ready to launch the survey on Monday, November 9th. As Max said, it'll continue for a 2.5 week period until November 25th, the day before Thanksgiving. In the middle, we have a staff workshop scheduled for November 18th for the large water systems that will be answering the household impact survey. And we'll be tracking the response rate throughout the survey period. And when we return from the Thanksgiving holiday, we should have a really good idea of what follow-up needs to be done with some non-responsive systems or clarification on survey answers. And we can begin the data analysis throughout December and likely be able to report back in the first board meeting in January. And next slide, which is the last slide. I don't know, Max, do you have a close?
Yeah, and I would just add, so for anyone watching the webcast who has additional questions, my email and Sean's email are here. And I would just add for the board that we also have developed emails and an FAQ document explaining to the systems what we're collecting, why we're collecting this data, how we intend to use the data, what type of analysis will be running on the data. So we should have a good understanding out there of what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. Also, as you saw on the last slide, we will be holding a workshop in a couple of weeks to make sure that we can answer any questions about specific data responses or issues that water systems may be encountering when they are filling out the survey. So with that, we'll be happy to take questions.
Just thank you so much, Max and Sean, for the incredible work, and Darren as well. And I know, so many of the staff at the Division of Drinking Water or RPP and folks to just really stand this up, and just very impressed. Appreciate the clear timelines here, and excited to just execute. And I know that it's required some time here for us to make sure we get it right. The methodologies that we're using, making sure that we're having just the right amount of touch here, not creating more work than we need, but really getting these data points when it comes to the impacts that the moratorium is having in our communities, and the continued concern that we've certainly voiced over the last months, but that we really need to put a finer point on if we're going to then make that next step into actual policy discussions around what we do as a state, what we do as communities, and how we just better understand the situation households and systems are facing, all the thousands that are here within the state. And so, and also want to just acknowledge that it's sensitive for systems to talk about these challenges. And what I hope this does build further is the trust with the Division of Drinking Water, with the board, and know that it's not that we're the government and we're here to help, but there are these points where appropriately the board can aggregate these state numbers, these data points, and that it's hard for the thousands of systems to amongst themselves just do on their own. And so appreciate the trust that this requires, and that the water districts themselves have been stepping up. And there, is we find we have mutual water companies, we know municipalities that run water systems, we have special districts, we have so many, such a variety of systems that we're trying our best, again, when it comes to the questions, to just capture what we need to understand and know, and then hopefully it lets us have a more informed policy discussion. So just really appreciate the great professional work that's been done on this, and no real further question, but certainly turn it over to fellow board members here if they do, or for comment as well. So just thank you.
I'll just echo thanks, and I don't have much to add beyond what the chair just said. So I just have been so thankful and impressed with how quickly staff have pulled this together in terms of, a very big lift very fast, and also the aggressive timeline to make sure that we can get this characterization by the end of the year and present it in early January. And also just really appreciate the collaborative development of this with water agencies and associations to make sure that the questions are effective and going to be least burdensome, but also give us all the data that we need, and look forward to seeing how we continue that effort to be developing a joint understanding of this challenge as we go forward and as it's evolving, and then be able to help shape shape responses and figure out what we can do at the state and also local best practices and also certainly federal dollars and trying to get that. And I think we have, I think I'll give a little bit more at the board updates, but, this was presented at the joint CPUC hearing last Friday. And so I can, I think within that can share more of the insights, but just shows, such a commitment of coordinated action around this issue throughout the state, and really thankful for staff and stakeholders' work.
I agreed with all of those comments, and just want to add that I've been really encouraged to see the broad coalition of water associations, environmental justice NGOs that have been, really supportive and encouraging in this effort, and not just in development of the questions and exactly what the survey is going to include, but also in getting the word out and reaching out to communities, to our water systems, to really help explain, on top of the FAQs and all the work that Max and Sean and others I know you'll be doing here in the coming weeks, but just to know that there really is support across a broad spectrum here in the state, that we do need this information. We are trying to help make informed decisions, make informed recommendations, and without this input, it's really hard for us to do. And so I am very hopeful that this survey is going to give us that input and that data point that's really going to help set the stage for a successful 2021, so we can continue in the right direction, so we can avoid, to the extent possible, unneeded shutoffs, so we can keep water systems in good operating condition and solvent, because that's really what we want to see at the end of the day. So just thank you to everyone who's working on this, and I know there's so much work still to be done here, but it's important, it's essential, and look forward to seeing the results and getting the updates in the coming weeks. Thank you.
And I just want to say a note of thanks also back to Chair Esquivel and board members Firestone and McGuire for your leadership and engagement on this. It has required a lot of dialogue with stakeholder groups, with water associations, with advocates, and coordination at the staff level to make sure we did get the questions sort of tightly worded to make sure we're getting the information that we need. And so it's been a heavy lift, and really appreciate, again, the leadership and engagement all three of you brought to this. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Max. Yeah, definitely want to acknowledge board members Firestone and McGuire there that really stood up these last weeks and helped make sure shepherd just a good discussion, to your point. So thank you. Members Dodek or Vice Chair, anything to add? Okay.
I don't want to take up any more time, but I agree with everything that's been said, and just really appreciate the stakeholders getting together and helping us to thread the needle. So look forward to more results.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, well, thank you, Max and Sean. And I think there's a second part to our COVID update here.
Yes. Are you ready for us to transition to that?
Yeah, I think we're ready now. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And thank you as well, Executive Director Sobek. It's through your leadership as well that we've been corralling this effort. So thanks for helping ensure that we are delivering on this request from the board.
Thank you. Well, this next part is something a little different, but it is directly related. It couldn't be more directly related to the COVID outbreak here in California and across the country. As we know, we haven't licked COVID yet as a country. There are a surge in cases across the nation, and part of the plan here in California to keep cases down and under control and minimize exposure sickness and death is a program that was launched by Governor Newsom this spring called California Connected, and it's part of the state's comprehensive contact tracing program and public awareness campaign. And so public health workers from communities across the state connect with individuals who test positive for COVID-19 and work with them and the people they've been in close contact with to ensure they have access to confidential testing, medical care, and other services that they may need to protect their individual health and to stop the spread of the virus. This effort is being led by the California Department of Public Health, local public health departments, and the UC system. Both UC San Francisco and UCLA have really helped with online training for some of the contact tracing workforce. As we can only imagine as one federal agency, this has been a huge lift for the Department of Public Health. Talk about unanticipated workloads. It was quite a responsibility for them to step up this program. And they determined this spring that California needs more than 10,000 contact tracers to support this program. And the way that the state has been able to mobilize that necessary workforce is that all state departments were asked to provide 5% of their staff for this effort. So the Water Board has done its part. Really proud to be part of this effort. We currently have 85 staff members participating. 46 of those are from the State Water Board, 39 from the regional water boards. You know, the deployments have been, we've been told to expect between 6 and 9 months. It's really, many individuals' experiences have been different. Some have served a shorter time. We have no idea. We don't really know how long this is going to go on. It will, I think, be dictated by the course of the pandemic rather than strict time periods. So we started stepping up and providing our list of people who are contributing to this effort in May. And I just wanted to note that, you know, when you think about it, everything that's happened to members of our staff, we've talked about the transition to telework, what a big change that was. We've talked about the fact that state employees have taken a 10% pay cut, and that is, you know, adds stress to people's lives, and it also makes it difficult for people to do everything that's on their work plate. And for the 85 staff members who participated in this effort, all of a sudden they were reassigned to a job that they did not sign up for and did not know anything about and did not know how to do. And that's quite a lot of to ask of people. And I just want to make sure that we all recognize all these people who have been volunteered and who have been sort of thrown into this new but really important effort. I want to tell you that it has not been easy and has not always gone well for every staff member who's participated. As I said, it's really not what people signed up for when they came to work, but everybody has done their best. And I think a number of people have had a good experience and have been able to feel like they've contributed to helping us get a handle on the pandemic through these efforts. I also want to shout out and hope that you'll recognize that the staff that stayed and worked at the water boards and the supervisors have really tried to pick up and cover for the folks who have been redirected to contact tracing, because of course the work here at the board didn't change or go away. For many of our volunteers are from small offices or small staff units, and so their absence for 6 to 9 months is actually quite substantial to the work and productivity of their office. So it seemed to me that the best way to kind of recognize this group overall, but also just get a feel for what they're doing and how they're doing it and what their impressions are. We're to bring a couple of them to the board meeting and to ask them to share their experiences with you. So we have two people have graciously agreed to share their experiences. We have Solmaz Marzugi from Division of Water Quality and Patrick Henderson from the Office of Legislative Affairs. So we would like to give each of them 5 to 10 minutes to give us a picture of what it's been like, what the challenges have been, and if there are any rewards that they'd like to share with us. So I don't know which of you wants to go first.
I can go first.
Great,
Eileen.
thank you.
Thank you, Eileen, for the introduction. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Solmaz Marzugi. I'm a water resource control engineer with State Water Board, Division of Water Quality. Can I have the slides, please? Or is that showing the slides? Thank you. Since June, I've been working as a volunteer contact tracer with Los Angeles County Department of Public Health. Please, next slide. I'm going to give a brief talk about what contact tracing is, why contact tracing is vital to fighting COVID-19, how I was prepared for my new role as a contact tracer, and what activities and challenges are involved in my job. Next slide, please. Contact tracing is the process of identifying persons who may have close contact with a COVID-19 positive patient. The goals of contact tracing are to identify the source of infection, establish an epidemiological link, interrupt ongoing transmission, and eventually prevent further spread of the infection. Please, next slide. Before starting my job as a contact tracer, I and other contact tracers were professionally trained for our new role by public health officials through a series of webinars, online trainings, and practicing. The trainings included learning how to effectively communicate with the confirmed cases and contacts. I learned how to build rapport and trust in a brief encounter on the phone to convince people to cooperate with me and with the government's tracing effort. I was also trained for handling various challenging situations and communication barriers that might come up during the interview. I was trained how to provide education about COVID-19 and health orders for cases and contacts, depending on their health conditions and living settings. In all steps of contact tracing, it is important to ensure confidentiality and privacy of information gathered from cases and contacts as it relates to HIPAA. As contact tracing for COVID-19 is completely in digital form, the trainings also included how to use softwares and database specific to LA County Department of Public Health. Next slide, please. As a contact tracer, my job entails calling the laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 patients, or we call them cases. When I call the cases, I ask about their health conditions and living settings. I provide the cases general education about how to self-isolate. I calculate the isolation period for each individual then. I ask about their workplace and the places they have visited in order to identify the outbreak's more recent trajectory. Then I collect information about their close contacts or contacts. The contacts are individuals with whom the cases have had close contacts during their infectious period. After completing the case profile, I immediately call their contacts and notify them of their potential exposure to COVID-19 and ask them to self-quarantine. I create demographic and health profiles for each contact and advise them about what symptoms to watch for and how to self-isolate if they develop symptoms. I also educate them about basic preventative measures, including physical distancing, cough etiquette, hand washing, and sanitizing frequently touched surfaces. Then I monitor the contacts during their quarantine periods to check how quarantine days have been for them, if they are following quarantine orders, and whether they have developed any symptoms. If the cases and contacts need any social support, I link them to resources available within the jurisdiction. Another task that comes up occasionally when we have new contact tracers joining our team is to help them get up to speed by having them interview shadow me and sharing challenging situations that might come up during the interview and the strategies that I found effective in addressing them. Please, next slide. Speaking of challenging situations, as much as I enjoy contact tracing, it gets challenging sometimes. Contact tracing is as much about compassion as it is about disease surveillance. Cases and contacts are dealing with unpleasant situations, and I feel compassion and empathy when I communicate with them, but it can be emotionally draining. So it's very important to keep my spirits up for my job. Also, I might not always be able to get hold of some cases and contacts because some people are not responsive or some are skeptical. Some people might have numerous reasons to refuse to cooperate, such as concern about the stigma, wage loss, or deportation. I need to get them to trust me in order to convince them to cooperate. I have learned the best strategy involves actively listening to their concern and to educate rather than confront, and not to take their reaction personally. Please, next slide. The challenges, however, have equipped me with essential skill set that can benefit my work when I return to DWQ. This experience has provided me a unique opportunity to communicate with members of the public and strengthen my interpersonal communication skills on a daily basis. Sometimes I interview people that are going through complex situations in their household or their workplace. I have learned how to listen to them patiently, address their concerns, and provide strategies on their complex situations. Before starting my new job as contact tracer, it seemed like a daunting task for me. Now I'm confident with initiating conversation with members of the community, building rapport and trust with them, ensure them confidentiality, reassure them we are acting in their best interests, and convince them to cooperate to achieve our common goal. To sum up, I have had the chance acting as an epidemiological investigator, educator, and social worker wrapped in one. And this formative experience would not be possible without support of my supervisor, Brianna St. Pierre, and our assistant deputy director, Shala Faradnak. Brianna allowed me to volunteer for contact tracing despite the hectic workload of our team. So I would also like to thank the whole team for taking over for me. Next, please. And this is me as an example of what I do to keep my spirits high when I'm not COVID hunting. Thanks for your attention and for your interest in contact tracing. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Solmaz. I think maybe we'll hear from Patrick, and then if the board members have some questions, you guys can take turns fielding them. So Patrick, let's turn it over to you.
All righty. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members and Executive Director Sobek. Thank you for having me today. My name is Patrick Henderson, and I am a legislative analyst in the Office of Legislative Affairs. And I'm here today to share my experience serving for a few months as a COVID-19 case investigator for Fresno County. Now, we heard a little bit about the duties of contact tracers. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to be a case investigator. So while contact tracers were assigned to talk to people who were identified as being in close contact with individuals who had tested positive for COVID-19, my job as a case investigator was to talk to the actual individual who tested positive. So the way that would work is that clinics and hospitals in Fresno County would send case information to the medical investigation team, and those cases would be assigned to case investigators like me. Upon assignment, I would access the case's information, assign myself as the case investigator on their files, and check to ensure that they had actually tested positive. I would then make 3 attempts to contact that case over at least 3 days. If I was unable to contact a case, or if a case refused to speak to me, there was a procedure for documenting that case as unable to locate or refuse contact. The majority of cases did answer the phone, and the over-the-phone interview was at the center of my duties. If I was able to make positive contact with the case, I had 3 primary tasks. One was to establish their identity according to Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act requirements. That's HIPAA. You all may have heard of that. The next was to administer the case investigation survey. And this was a survey designed to collect personal information, work details, social interactions, any symptoms that they had experienced, any pre-existing health conditions that they may have had, whether they needed public assistance, and was really focused on getting any close contacts that they may have had during their infectious period. The third task was to issue isolation orders and make sure that the isolation orders were understood. And then to answer any questions or concerns from the individual that I was talking to. So on average, a call would last about 15 minutes. But if I needed an interpreter, or if the case had a lot of social interactions or close contacts, it could last a lot longer. Upon successful conclusion of a call, I would enter the collected information into Fresno County's online system, make sure that written health orders were sent to the case, and then close the case according to Fresno County public health criteria. I would also take time to ensure that my cases were tracked both on a spreadsheet that I set up and in a notebook that I have here in front of me. And I would say that these administrative parts of my duties took up probably half of the time that I spent on each individual case, because accurate documentation and tracking of where I was in the case investigation were essential to closing cases and making sure that they were completed successfully. So in broader terms, I was initially trained with the state as a contact tracer in early June. I subsequently volunteered as a case investigator and was trained by the state at the end of July. On August 13th, I was notified that my assignment with Fresno County would begin on August 17th, so a bit of a short timeline there. And at that point, I was given the contact information for my new supervisor. But because I had been preparing for assignment for some time, my transition from normal duties to my new duties was relatively quick and painless. And my management and staff at the Office of Legislative Affairs should be commended for being able to easily and quickly take up that workload. The first week I was with Fresno County was training on their systems, and then I was assigned my first cases. While I was there were a lot of additional meetings for more instruction on specific subtasks. There were myriad changes to workflow as Fresno County tweaked the process, and several one-on-one meetings with both my county assigned team lead and with my state supervisor. And this pattern held pretty steady the entire time I was there. with a lull in early September and another lull in October, during which I was informed that I would be returned to my normal duties, and here I am. There were good days and bad. On some days I would be uplifted, and then on some I would just be exhausted and emotionally numb. But overwhelmingly, the responses I got from people that I talked to were gratitude, relief, just relief that somebody was reaching out to them, optimism, and determination. There were a few occasions that I did run into anguish, fear, grief, and in two memorable cases, just outright hostility. When I got started, it became clear that the county was still developing the case investigation program, even as the county was asking us to implement it. And to address this, I really buried myself in learning Fresno County's system and workflow. I was one of the few case investigators who were actually able to start making calls that first week. I was successful in assisting other case investigators, helping them learn more finicky parts of the programs, covering more complicated parts of the workflow, things like that, all while maintaining my work calling cases. And I did finish my assignment as one of the top case investigators on the team. For positive takeaways, between my state personnel manager, Ricardo Gonzalez from the California Department of Veterans Affairs, and my Fresno County Medical Investigation Team leader, Anisha Nagra, I was fortunate to have the support of exceptional direct management. They both understood the effects of being thrown into a chaotic environment and were critical in ensuring that we had the best support possible. They were consistent in bringing our team's concerns to Fresno County MIT management, medical investigation team management, and ensuring to the best of their ability that our concerns were addressed. I could not have asked for better leadership. This excellent leadership from our state and county staff was complemented by an extraordinarily strong sense of community amongst the state staff assigned to Fresno County. From the very start, we all demonstrated a willingness to communicate among ourselves, and this really did improve all of our performances as case investigators. There were many challenges we did have to overcome. From my perspective, the first challenge that I really had to work on was how not to speak in the technical language of a state worker. It can be familiar and comforting in a given situation to sort of fall back on the language of the workplace that we come from. But that language and that pattern of speaking can be really impenetrable to somebody not experienced or who doesn't have experience with that environment. And it could actually really make it difficult if you have to interface with a caller through an interpreter. So unlearning that habit was critical. The most stressful and most important part of my duties was making contact with people that had recently tested positive for COVID-19. As you might imagine, reaching out to people in a time of anxiety and stress is a bit of a dicey proposition. The most significant challenge I faced here was finding a balance between maintaining that professional demeanor and being a transparent and authentic person over the phone. And I think everybody's run into that challenge on Zoom. Third, when I was assigned to Fresno County, I had to learn an entirely new system. So Fresno County did not adopt the state CalConnect framework on which I was originally trained as a contact tracer and case investigator. So CalConnect is an integrated platform, meaning that all pertinent information, utilities, scripts are contained therein. Instead, I was retrained that first week to use Fresno County platforms that in aggregate were similar to CalConnect, but were much more technically oriented. Fourth, the training that we received from Fresno County staff was clearly an accelerated adaptation of existing training for on-site staff. And the training staff, while excellent, were extremely hard pressed to ensure that newly assigned case investigators like me were prepared for their duties. This included an inability to ensure that everyone had accounts to access Fresno systems. And in some cases, this lasted for weeks. And as I said earlier, the workflow guidance changed on almost a week-to-week basis. And that brings us to number 5, the soft phone. So the soft phone that we were provided was dial-out only. There was no number that a person could call back to actually reach us. And the area code displayed to the case was from a different area, making the number seem like spam. And lastly, there was not a whole lot of support to offer people that needed support. So the only thing that we were given to respond to requests for support was Valley 211, which is sort of a clearinghouse, a nonprofit clearinghouse for resources that are available to people. And other than that, we didn't have a whole lot to share, which I found frustrating. In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic is a once-in-a-generation challenge. It's an event that has touched every single one of us, and it'll leave its mark on our state for years to come. We talk sometimes about implementing new programs as building the car as we drive it. I fought fire for a few years, and I would describe my experience with COVID-19 more like that of smoke jumper. Smoke jumpers are the elite firefighters who are trained to parachute out of airplanes in order to fight fire in remote areas. Well, with a few tools, we state workers were assigned to jump out of our agencies into a complex and dynamic environment and do our best to fight a pandemic spreading like wildfire. We did the best we could. I'm proud to have been a part of our state's response to COVID-19, and I'm proud of the work I did as a case investigator for Fresno County. Our team was a crucial part of a larger effort to come to grips with COVID-19. I am grateful for the experience, and I'm equally grateful to be back working with the State Water Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm not going to read it out loud. I have it in front of me, but we got a very strong letter of recommendation from his supervisor about Patrick's work. And I think it's fair to say that it's likely that the same accolades that were set out in that letter, which I'm happy to share with board members, probably apply to many of our volunteers, that they were, giving everything and bringing all of their communication skills and technical skills to the challenges that they faced, and that those have been recognized. But maybe you all have questions. I'll step back and let you ask them, and ask Solmaz and Patrick to respond.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Sobek. First and foremost, for your leadership in acknowledging that we needed to hear these stories, that we did have a significant portion of our staff, or a portion of our staff out there, and being able to unearth. And thank you to Patrick and Solmaz for just being so honest and genuine around the challenges of the work, the ways it could have perhaps been improved, but also the incredible lessons and takeaways that you were able to kind of bring back to your work, and that perspective that you were able to bring to it. Just thank you for that compassion as well, for what are very difficult circumstances all of us are facing. And I think to Executive Director Sobek's point at the start, certainly you all had sort of even more of a compounding, sort of challenging space these last months, and just so incredibly proud of the leadership you've all demonstrated in this, and the way you've represented us with our sister agencies out there, and just risen to the occasion in such an incredible way. I feel very fortunate just to be part of this organization, and glad to lift up your stories here and your lessons, particularly because you're representative of so many others behind you as well in this space. So just thank you, and kudos to the really great work. Less questions at this point, other than how do you see best, maybe particularly the lessons around how best to engage communities, how to listen, how to be patient with circumstances. I think of the Safe and Affordable Fund and the SAFER program and our implementation there, and the as we do mandatory consolidations in small communities, et cetera, these skills are very similar. How to listen, how to be patient, and how to sympathize with what are often very in stressful situations that communities are under, and rightfully so. Anger, and sometimes sadness, or any number of the sort of emotions you've had to deal with when it comes to those in the COVID space. So Yeah, I guess just general question, how do you see best finding opportunities to, whether it's just to share some of your personal lessons with other staff, or how we might kind of grow as an agency and benefit from your all time in the contact tracing work? So just kind of a maybe just general question there, but more than anything, just a thank you.
I think I could offer a partial answer to that. Something that I really tried to do while I was talking to people was to, I guess, tactically mirror an appropriate emotional response. So in terms of people that were perhaps angry or hostile or hesitant, maybe not mirroring those particular emotions, but people who were scared, people who were sad, people who were despondent. Something that was really useful for me was to shed a little bit of my more polished professional demeanor and talk a little bit more authentically and come from a more human experience. Really dig into my own past to empathize with whatever was going on with that person, and really try to present that over the phone. Now, over the phone is difficult specifically because it really takes away your ability to communicate through facial expression, through body language, and things like that. So it was tough to vocally empathize on the phone. I leaned on humor quite a bit, and I leaned on self-effacing humor quite a bit. And that was that's part of the balance I was talking earlier between professional demeanor and coming across authentic. But I think it's it's not a net negative to be a little less polished, a little less professional, and a little bit more human, so that the people that we're talking to know that we're people too, and that's okay. That opens opportunities for communication.
If I may?
Sorry,
Oh,
I was just going to add something. I agree with what Patrick said. In general, when I want to extrapolate it to what I do as a public employee and how I'm going to apply to that, we might face some challenges. We might have some trust issues with government, and people might be frustrated, and that might apply that to this effort or other effort that sometimes we act in their best interest, but they might say that no, who is this government person trying to regulate me or enforce some regulation for me that probably is just supporting their best interest. But the important thing here is listening to them. As Patrick said, it's human to human more than is a regulator or public health worker to human. And actively listening to their frustration and being patient with them. On several occasions, I had to call them back to continue the conversation, because first, yeah, we don't have the option of seeing the body language. People might be frustrated, be tired, or they're going through some health issues because they were patient, or they're sick. It takes patience. It actually took practice. I would say that it's something that we can gain it through practice. I called them back, and I kind of persistently, not pushing them, but just being patient, not pushy. It's just a fine line between them, and probably made several calls to get hold of them and get the information that I needed. So the second or third call probably brought more more result for me, because they say that it's a familiar voice calling me back, and they were like more friendly for second or third calls with me. So I think this persistent communication is finally going to be built even with very difficult people. So it's just removing the barrier is very important, and it really depends on different personalities. It's not just one route to that. a lot of pathway to find a way for people trust and building rapport with them. I kind of psychoanalyze people. I have the option of analyze it by their tone. I don't see body language. I cannot make eye contact. But even very difficult situation got me used to very worst case scenario. So it would be probably easier with person to person when see them in person, when they see you. But even with this, when they hear familiar voice, they appear to be trusting you better. So I would say just being patient, being persistent, and not to be pushy. That was my take-home message.
Thank you. I'll add my thanks to those of the chair, both for getting out of your comfort zone and providing such service, really for all Californians, but I think more importantly to the individuals whose lives you touched. I think that is, we all as individuals strive to make a difference, especially on a one-to-one connection, and you've done that. And thank you so much for doing so and for educating us on what you did. My one question is, unfortunately, knowing that the situation with COVID will at least remain for some time to come, and there might be need for future volunteer contact tracers. From your experience, is there anything we as an organization can do to better prepare future volunteers to step into the roles that you did? Is there anything we can do to make things, the transition, the experience, I guess, a little bit easier?
It's a very good point. It actually goes back to the reason that why I volunteer for that. So on the technical side, I think through my past work and work with Water Board, it was great opportunity. But I had little opportunity to go and talk directly to members of public. I was able to talk to a lot of regional board staff, but they were people like technical people like me, but people that way more different because just in terms of using jargons or in terms of, not just the verbal part of it, just part of it that how you can find the way to just get inside and, it's just, they're going to feel the connection with you. It was little opportunity. I think if I had more opportunity to, be in contact with general public would have been a lot easier. So it actually depends on our jurisdiction that we are assigned to. So for LA County, you might see that we are kind of more dealing with Hispanic population. So there was a very good opportunity for me to have a real hands-on experience with communicating with them and have a touch of their community, which I really, really enjoy that. So maybe just, I don't know, it's possible exposing staff to the member of community directly, not necessarily in supervisor or manager level, maybe more in staff level. I'm not sure if anybody else in other divisional department has that, but I didn't have that, and I appreciate the unique opportunity that this contact tracing gave me to have it. Yeah, if that answered your question. Thank you for the question.
I completely agree with all of that. I would say really in technical and sort of specific terms, the only thing that I can think of that would really help state water board or state agency employees be more effective as contact tracers or case investigators is really to just practice talking to people. And maybe even practice talking to people over the phone so that they could understand the differences between face-to-face contact or Zoom contact and what it's like to be on the phone. Practice makes perfect.
Well, thank you all. Again, just really impressed. And to Board Member Godek's point, maybe the training academy, there's, some training there that's, better about that sort of engagement, or, we can look at maybe the activities that we undertake, take turns manning the public phone line for the boards, perhaps. I recall back to my time as an intern when I had to answer the phones, in DC for Senator Boxer, and you quickly learn how to diffuse or speak to a wide range of folks. But just anyway, thank you again. This was a great item. Thank you, Executive Director, for the thought to bring this to us. And I think it was really critical. Any other thoughts or questions to folks? And if not, we can begin to move on to our next item then. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank you,
everyone
Patrick.
Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity. Bye.
Huge round of applause. So thank you.
To see other faces.
Yeah, good to see you, Patrick. All right, well, that concludes item number 3. Do we want to take a quick, 5-10 minute break? Does that sound nice for folks? We can, we have a little, I know, and I apologize. Yes, Board Member Firestone, was that just a yes? Okay. Yeah, okay, 5. Yeah, let's go to do 5 and we'll quickly come back then here at 10:25 and continue on with our next item. So thanks, folks. All right, we're at 10:25, so I think we can return back here. Next item is an informational item on current hydrologic conditions. And I'll note that I think it's been a bit since we've had our hydrologic update, and appreciate that we have today John Lehigh, Michael Anderson, and Kristen White, along with our staff here to provide a pretty comprehensive hydrologic update, I think. So thank you, appreciate it. And Mr. Mubako?
Thank you. Good morning, board chair and board members. My name is Stanley Mubako. I'm an environmental scientist in the Division of Water Rights at the State Board. We do have multiple presenters for this item today, as the chair has mentioned. And I would first like to introduce our guest presenters, Christine White from the United States Bureau of Reclamation. We also have on board John Lehigh and Michael Anderson, both are from the Department of Water Resources. So I will leave this time first to John and Christine to present water year 2020 and current hydrologic reservoir conditions and operations. John and Christine. Next slide, please.
Yes. So thank you. Good morning, Chair Esquivel, Vice Chair Diadamo, board members. My name is John Lehigh, Lead Water Operations Manager for the State Water Project, and Kristen White with Central Valley Operations will be following me here shortly. So Kristen and I will start out the discussion here for this agenda item by talking through the current conditions and basically precipitation leading to current status here and storages. Next slide, please. So this is a look at the precipitation for water year 2020 that just completed here September 30th. As you can see from the map, quite dry conditions in 2020, especially in the northern half of the state. So those areas indicated with the red represent precipitation totals that were between 25 to 75% of normal or average precipitation. For those regions, you can see the southern part of the state fared a little bit better, closer to average, or in some cases above average precipitation. As a result of this picture here, the State Water Project ended up allocating 20% allocation to our contractors, which is one of the lower allocation levels that we've seen historically. Next slide, please. So to kind of put that those precipitation totals in context, we've got our, you may be familiar with this graphic. It's posted on the department's webpage, but this shows precipitation totals for various years historically. A little busy here, so let me help point out some key years. So last year, water year 2020 will be in black on this, resulting in precipitation total of 31.7 inches. That was roughly a little over 60% of an average for the 50-year average for precip. And this is the Northern Sierra 8 station, as you can see depicted in the map here. Just a point of comparisons would be, you can see 14, 15, second very dry year of the drought, recent drought. You can see it was actually drier than that year. What's not shown here, unfortunately, is water year 2014. That ended at a very similar precipitation level as we saw this last year in 2020. The better news for us is that we 2020 came after a fairly decent year. You can see here in the gray, which is water year 2019. We actually had well above average precip in that year. So this 2020 does represent the first dry year in the sequence here. And you can also see, of course, the wettest year on record in green here, which was the 2017, and 1977, how dry it got that year was actually the second driest on record, the driest through August. Next, oh, I'm sorry, let me, and then of course, where we are in this year, starting water year 2021, we have yet to see any measurable precip whatsoever. So for the entire month of October, complete goose egg. That's, I believe that may be the first time we've had no precipitation recorded in October. There have been a handful of years historically where we've just seen a trace, basically. So some examples of that were 1967, 1979, 1996, 2003. 3 out of 4 of those years actually ended up being above average precipitation. So I don't think there's, we don't need to panic yet just because of the very poor start to this water year. Next slide, please.
I'm glad to hear that because, you know, heart level elevates a little bit. I did actually just want to say, and thank you for being here, Mr. Lehigh, is the incredible, you know, typical California difference though between the 2018-2019 water year and then this last water year. Just, you know, huge shift from water year to water year oftentimes for us. But yes, it's dry, but we don't have to get too terribly worried yet.
That's right. And there's a graphic coming up here a little later that will show kind of the oscillations that we've been seeing in recent years between kind of very, you know, very good years and not so good years. So we'll be showing that here shortly. So just wanted to run through more quickly here a couple of the other precip indexes. So this 5-station index is for the San Joaquin Basin, and it roughly shows the same sort of pattern. Here, this 24.6 was also roughly about 60% of an average precipitation. We actually we were worse off in 2014 and 2015 for the San Joaquin Basin anyway. Everything else is pretty similar to the patterns we've seen for 8-station. Next slide, please. And then finally, the 6-station, which is for the Tulare Basin region, again, looking pretty similar to what we just saw there in the San Joaquin Basin. Again, you know, dry year, a little bit better than the 14-15. And again, coming off of above average water year 2019. Next slide, please. Snowpack, too early for snowpack readings. As you can see, the graphic here doesn't even start until December. We don't typically have appreciable snowpack until we get into December, but this shows where we've been the last few years. Last year, 2020 is actually this blue. It doesn't look like it's labeled on here, but it's actually the solid blue line on the graphs, and this is north, central, and south. So that's roughly equivalent to the 3 precip indices that we just looked at. So you can see, you know, below average snowpack as you would expect with a below average precipitation this past year. The year before, quite a bit healthier snowpack, above average because of the primarily because of the above average precipitation. Snowpack, I will say, actually did pretty well. You know, in recent years, we've seen the snowpack in terms of percent not matching the precip in terms of percent because of warmer conditions, but actually that year kind of held its own. We had a fairly decent snowpack down of precip we saw in 2019. You can also see 2017 and the largest on record, which was 1983. And of course, we can't forget the dismal readings we had in the most recent drought in 14 and 15. Some record low snowpacks. Next slide, please. So yeah, here's the graphic I was referring to earlier, which so this is actually runoff. So we've been looking at precip and snowpack, and where the rubber really meets the road is the actual runoff that results from snow melt and direct runoff of precip events. And so this graph is good in terms of showing in an absolute sense. Well, it's an index, but it does give you, no, this is the runoff in million acre feet. So it gives you in an absolute sense how the runoff in the historical years compare. It also gives you the water year classification. And water year classification is influenced by the previous year. So for example, you take a look at this recent 2020 water year, was classified as a dry year. You can see that actually there are some years with similar runoff were actually classified as critically dry. So one of the reasons we were in the dry category is it did follow a wet year. And so there is influence from the previous year in terms of determining that water classification. But this also represents, if we look historically, what can we expect coming up? If we just look strictly by the historical record, patterns really vary. So what we were just talking about was kind of the oscillation that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of very wet conditions and either average or drier conditions in between. Of course, we had the pretty severe drought in the middle of the last decade, and more prolonged drought back in the late 80s and early 90s. But then we've also seen stretches of wet conditions. Late 90s are a good example of that. So if you just look strictly from the historical record, it's not real helpful in terms of predicting where we head from here, because you can see various patterns. So perhaps Mr. Michael Anderson, state climatologist, will be up next, and maybe he can give us a little bit more insight as to what to expect.
I actually have a question on this slide.
Sure.
Right? So this is really helpful, and also Mr. Lehigh, your discussion about the classification, looking at the prior year. But I remember during the drought, I don't remember which year, but even in a year where we did see some precipitation, starting to come out of the drought, there were such issues with soil accretions and just how much punch you could get with the runoff or with the precipitation. And so does this slide account for soil accretions as well?
Yeah. So I believe that's part of the rationale for the influence of the previous year on the current year's water year classification. So I think the thought process is likely that coming off of a wet year, a wetter year, you're likely to be in better shape in terms of your storages and probably your soil conditions as well. And so I think that's part of the reason why there is that antecedent condition that influences that water year type. And and the reverse is of course true, where if you're coming off a dry year, you're likelier to be lower in storages and lower groundwater, drier soil conditions. So a lot of the precipitation that you see in that next year is likely to be absorbed by the soil and low reservoir storages.
Thank you.
And Mr. Lehigh, I also thank you for your presentation today. I really appreciate you being here, and this is very helpful and I think timely information. My one takeaway from this, and I know it's hard to draw conclusions from the historical record, is we try to look forward here and predict. But one thing I do notice is that, it does seem like the drier years come in bunches. It's not a lot of cases where there's a standalone single dry year by itself. And so, or a critical year even, as I look at the historical record there. And so, just something to keep in mind and always be mindful of that, we don't know until we're in it, whether it's going to be dry or not. And I know we're early in the season here, but I think it is prudent to be cognizant of, looking at the 88 to 92 drought and the most recent drought. And then, in the late 20s, early 30s. I mean, those are all sequences there where, we had a number of dry critical years kind of grouped together. And so California does have a record of multi-year drought occurrences. So it's just really important to always be aware of that.
Yes, board member, point well taken. And I think what you'll find is inherent to both SWP and CVP planning efforts is that essentially we're always assuming that the next year will be on the drier side. So that's kind of an inherent understanding of the planning process. So thank you for that point. Next slide, please. So this graphic you may not be as familiar with, but this is showing 2 years of runoff, and this is for Central Valley. So this is essentially the 8 river index, so both the Sacramento and the San Joaquin rivers runoff. And so this starts beginning of water year 2020. And if you just kind of ignore the squiggly blue line, that's kind of the daily runoff totals, but the cumulative runoff in volume, which is measured on the, let's see, on the left side of the graph, is the solid pink line. That's the cumulative volume of runoff for the 8 rivers. And so you can see that at the end of water year 2020, we were only about half of what we typically have in terms of expected runoff or average runoff. And moving forward into water year 2021, these series of lines represent the different traces from essentially the last 30 years of the runoff that we saw in the last 30 years, and gives you at least a flavor for the probability of kind of recovering from this this deficit that we've had for water year 2020. So the green line is the median of all of the 30 years of traces, and that's bookended by the driest in red and the wettest in blue. So that will give you a feel for our ability to kind of recover from this last dry year. Next slide, please. So the so the storages, where are we going into potentially another dry year? So you can see that at least in the top 0 major reservoirs for the state, the top 4 there are CBP and SWP managed reservoirs, and you can see that we're running about 70 to 80% of average storage to date. That's the red figures there, and the blue percentages are absolute totals and capacity. So the total capacities are running, you see 37% of capacity at Folsom, up to 53% Trinity, Oroville and Shasta kind of in the middle there in the 70s. Looking a little bit better, kind of the mid part of the state, you can see New Melones is actually above average storage to date, and Don Pedro also right about a little over average. San Luis Reservoir, which we'll go into more detail during Kristen's portion of this, is slightly below average to date. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to focus in on the SWP managed reservoirs, and then I'll be handing it off to Kristen after that. Here's storage conditions in Lake Oroville. For the blue line there is currently where we are, just over 1.5 million acre feet. So to put that in context, we'll also have the last couple years, actually last 3 years prior to this water year, and also showing three of the years during the most recent drought. Water years 14 through 16 are also shown on here. So basically, you can see that we're relatively low in storage, but we're certainly better off than we were in 14, 15 through those drought years. So a little bit better positioned going into a dry year than we were in those other dry years back in 14, 15. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on where we currently are on the SWP operations. So for Lake Oroville, yeah, we're definitely in conservation mode. So we're basically only releasing minimums to meet the SWP share of the Bay Delta requirements and a minimal level of exports in the Delta. Feather River releases are basically being maintained at a sustainable spawning level. And that's the case here through October and November, both per agreement with CDFW and in our license. So we're keeping those flows at a sustainable level that can be maintained through winter for those spawning. Deliveries right now would be through the senior water rights holders up at Oroville. They have started their annual fall rice decomp demand. And so that typically continues on. That's directly out of the Oroville complex. So it's out of the Thermalito afterbay. But that goes, that demand should continue through about mid-January where that shuts off. We're also operating for temperature management for this period as well. We have had to do some bypass of power in order to keep the criteria for temperatures at the hatchery and in the river. That's kind of a typical operation for this time of year. In the Delta, again, we're meeting. So right now the standards that are at play are kind of the Rio Vista flow standard and Delta outflow and salinity requirements. And so something that's a little bit different is I think you're aware that there was 2018, there was an addendum to the Coordinated Operations Agreement between the SWP and the CVP. And one of the changes in that agreement is that Lake Oroville will actually shoulder more of the burden for in-basin requirements under drier years. There was a trade-off with wetter years, but that will shift, like I said, some of that burden from Shasta and Folsom to Lake Oroville should the next year be on the drier side. We are maintaining, as I said earlier, the SWP export level for operational flexibility and for contractor delivers for deliveries to contractors that are not directly connected to San Luis Reservoir to get their SWP supply. So a big example of that would be our South Bay contractors for Santa Clara Valley, Alameda, also North Bay contractors, Solano and Napa. So, we need to keep those minimum exports going. They do not have access to San Luis Reservoir. And also in terms of the operational flexibility, by what I mean there is in order to be able to react to conditions to meet the Bay Delta standards, one of the most important tools in our toolbox are to drop exports should there be a change that we need to respond to. And that's the most immediate change to delta outflow. If we have some level of export in which we can drop, that provides us that ability to help manage to those Bay Delta standards, whether it be salinity or delta outflow. So that's the end of my piece. Maybe I'll stop here, see if there's any specific questions on SWP. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Kristen White with Central Valley Operations.
I think we can transition to Kristen and save questions perhaps for the end there. And thank you so much again.
You bet.
Great, thanks, John, and thank you, board members, for having me here today. My name is Kristen White. I'm the operations manager for the Central Valley Operations Office for the Bureau of Reclamation, and I'm going to go over a couple of our reservoir updates and talk about a little bit of fall operations. So we'll start with Lake Shasta. So looking at Lake Shasta, we ended the water year, or began the water year right around 2.2 million acre feet. Given the fact that this was a pretty dry year, as you saw from John's slides earlier, that's a pretty good dry year start. So it sets us up a little bit better than we had, than we started in some of the past dry years. You can see from this graph that we're a little bit closer to 2018, which was a below normal year, than we are to some of the other dry years, such as 2014 and 2015. Next slide.
Looks like the slides disappeared on us. They should be coming back up here in a moment.
Oh, good. I thought it was just me.
Sorry, Kristen. One moment.
Okay, great. So the next slide is talking about Folsom Lake. Folsom Lake is a pretty similar situation to Shasta, where we ended just under 450,000 acre feet, as you can see on the graph, which is closer to the 2018 values. I should mention for both of these, you can see that we're still below average. This is not the condition that is ideal, but it's better for the very dry conditions that we saw from the precipitation in 2020. Okay, next slide. Great, and New Melones. New Melones is a very large reservoir for the size watershed it's on, so we really think about it as a multi-year reservoir where we rely on the storage from wet years to get us through sometimes multiple drought years. So New Melones is showing it's still carrying over some of that water from filling in 2017 and then again in 2019. So we sit in a fairly good storage spot, above average at just under 1.5 million acre feet at New Melones. So that's a good shape to be going into a drought year, although with multiple drought years, we'll still have concerns there. New Melones has a very wide range of potential inflows, and we have seen extremely low inflows into that reservoir. So that's always something we're concerned about. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then we have San Luis Reservoir. That's our offstream storage reservoir. We started the year just about average, and as you can see from John's slides, the very dry conditions of October and now November starting to slip a little bit below. We're just under 1 million acre feet, 934,000 acre feet. That's split about 59-41% between the state and federal. So that's right around a little over 550,000 acre feet on the state side, and the federal share is a little above 380,000 acre feet. So that's where we sit there. Okay, next slide. Great. So talk a little bit about fall operations and what we're seeing right now. So as John mentioned, we go into every fall assuming the next year is going to be dry. That's just the most conservative way we can approach it. And wetter is always easier unless it's really wet. So the first thing that we're doing across the board for fall operations is coordination. We're having a number of meetings ranging from daily meetings, weekly meetings, monthly meetings on all of our basins and Delta operations with our state and federal partners, including state board staff, to talk about what operations should look like, where priorities should be, and how we should be looking at making adjustments. So it's kind of our biggest action right now. So getting into the basin by basin specifics, we've got with the Sacramento River, our #1 goal is to conserve storage. We're trying to get down to our minimum storage by preferably the December 1st. However, right now we are making deliveries for rice decomp, similar to how John mentioned on the Feather River. This year, we worked with our Sacramento River settlement contractors to move some of their demand from late October into early November, which allowed us to make an earlier cut in flow releases out of Shasta in mid-October. That allowed us to prevent some of the fall run red dewatering that could have otherwise happened. So, we'll be making some releases for their demands through about the 2nd or 3rd week of November before we ramp down to our minimum winter flow. We're also reducing our Trinity releases to those required by the ROD. They have a winter base flow there too. For temperature, we're releasing from the lowest point on our temperature control device, and the nights are getting cooler, so there's not a whole lot of temperature management actions that are going on, with the exception of we are reducing our warmer Trinity River imports in order to preserve that colder water in the Sacramento River. So at this time of year, the water coming over from the Trinity system tends to be warmer than what's coming out of Shasta and Keswick. And then finally, Delta requirements. Although these aren't controlling our Sacramento River operations right now, there's something that we're continuously looking at to make sure that we're meeting our outflow, salinity, and Rio Vista requirements. So when we move into the American River, very similar story. We're trying to conserve storage. Folsom does have a much higher refill rate than any of the other reservoirs, but we still look at this as a potential dry year. So we are reducing our Folsom releases to what we hope to be a winter base flow. I think it says by early November in my slide, I think we made the change within the last couple of days. We are doing some temperature management at Folsom right now, trying to support some of the fall run that are in the system, and we'll likely be doing that until the reservoir turns over or fully mixes, so that at that point there won't be a stratification within the reservoir. And then of course we're looking at delta outflow and salinity, although those actions are not controlling operations at Folsom right now. Okay, next slide, please. On the Stanislaus River, we just finished our fall pulse, and so we'll be focusing on ramping down to our minimum fall winter base flows for stores conservation. And then finally in the Delta. So right now our Delta requirements are definitely controlling the system, but we're meeting them by modifying exports. I think John mentioned this a little bit in his slide too. So we'll be looking at modifying exports for meeting both outflow and salinity requirements, and also operating the Delta cross channel gates for fish protection, for meeting Rio Vista flows and Delta salinity. So that kind of changes. We're in a transitional period, so what the Delta cross channel gates are doing kind of changes week by week. So right now we're closing during the week for Rio Vista flows, and we'll be evaluating each week on how to adjust those. And finally, with respect to water supply, we're aiming to fill San Luis Reservoir, at least the federal side, although I know John's aiming to fill his side too, with the available water in the Delta, hopefully while keeping our minimum flows at the reservoirs. And so that covers most of our operations. And then finally, one effort that we have kicked off that we're working on closely is developing a drought toolkit. This is a multi-agency effort to try to have a kind of a clearly defined kit that will help identify some of the actions that we can be looking at should we be going into another dry year and starting a drought. Next slide, please. Okay, and lastly, I'll just touch on a couple other reservoirs. Although these aren't CVP reservoirs, or the first two aren't CVP reservoirs. Kachuma Reservoir is about 130,000 acre feet. That's about 88% of average and 68% of capacity. And Diamond Valley Lake is a little over 700,000 acre feet, which is about 87% of capacity. And I think I already touched on San Luis, which is about 87% of average, split 59-41% state and federal. That's it.
Next, we'll move on to talk about Water Year 2020 State Board water rights outreach and shortage activities, starting with North Coast streams. Next slide, please. Flows in the Russian River and other North Coast streams, they've been similar to or below flows observed during the 2012 to 2016 drought. And in terms of outreach activities, recognizing the need to protect threatened and endangered coral salmon and steelhead populations, state and regional board staff have been conducting outreach with state, federal, and local agency partners to inform water users of this situation. And moving on to the Scott River, notices of unavailability of water were issued June 19 to diverters with a junior priority class right in the watershed to minimize impacts on coral salmon. Flows were insufficient to satisfy demands under senior rights due to limited precipitation and snowpack. Next slide, please. And talking about 1091 a little bit, 1091 curtailments, they went into effect in early June due to dry conditions. The curtailments were lifted September 28, but reinitiated October 9, and they will remain in effect until wet weather or reduced demands result in changes to supplemental project water releases. I'll hand over at this stage to Michael Anderson to talk about water year 2020, current hydrologic reservoir operations as well. Next slide, please.
Michael, you're on mute.
So Michael, you may want to check on the Zoom client you have on your computer in the lower left corner where there's an audio. There's a little up arrow next to it, and you might be able to select a different audio device. So if you're going from a microphone or a headset, you'll want to make sure it's selected. So again, that's within the Zoom client. You might have to move the mouse around. Lower left corner is the audio option. It's right next to video. And try clicking on the up arrow and selecting a different option if there's one.
We may have lost Mr. Anderson here for a moment.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All righty, had to relaunch the application. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. Glad you can join us.
Glad to be able to be with you today. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so this is a product from Western Region Climate Center's California Climate Tracker. This takes PRISM data of temperature and precipitation from water year 1896 through water year 2020 and gives us an opportunity to see where in the historical distribution last year fell. On the left-hand side is the temperature, and what we see particularly in the northern part of the state in the top 10% of historical years in terms of temperature. So no surprise, with climate change, we continue to sample in that part of the distribution. What we see on the right-hand side is precipitation, and it really gives you a sense of the northern part of the state, just how dry it was. Seeing those numbers, if you're able to zoom in there, it was the 6th percentile. So really, really quite dry in the north. You see in the south, those wetter numbers, a lot of that was due to a fairly significant storm that came through around Thanksgiving and really kind of set the stage for then. They did go through a very dry January, February. In fact, statewide, February 2020 was the driest on record. Now, we couple that then with August and September being record hot. Really a year of extremes and a lot of internal variability. And we're going to touch on that theme as we head into 2021. So next slide, please. All right, so let's look at the U.S. Drought Monitor. This is a product that the USDA uses to do a lot of its rangeland and forage program relief. And this is a group of folks of which I participate. who provide their input, and they have a collection of about 15 different metrics geared to try and assess drought through one of D1 through D4, and really trying to understand how bad things are. Here we see at the beginning of water year 2019, after that wet year, only remaining drought is some long-term drought in the Colorado River Basin down in the far southeast corner of the state. Now, if we go to the next slide, we see where we're starting this year. And the story is significantly different. We actually see the impact of that really dry northern part where we're all the way down to D3 in parts of the North Coast Sacramento River watershed. And if you really squint hard, you can see on the eastern edge of Lassen County, it's starting to intrude from Nevada in there. Really only the central and south coast, which had, again, the productive November, December season really kind of influencing the metrics there. It is a bit of a challenge to try and interpret how the wild variability that we're seeing within a water year impacts more of the statistics that the drought monitor uses, which are more seasonally based. And it's kind of an ongoing conversation that we have. Next slide, we look at the Colorado River Basin, and you see the lack of monsoon, the southwest monsoon this year, combined with previous dry years, have led to really significant drought conditions being present in that part of the country. Next slide. All righty, so here we have from the National Resource Conservation Service for the Upper Colorado River, a look at where the snowpack is, because they have actually had some storms. They had an early season snowstorm in September that pushed down. You might remember the very windy days we had in September, as we were on the warm side of that front that pushed down and dropped some snow. And then again, they had one last week. So you see some large numbers there, but remember that that's 8% of average. So when you have a very small climatological value, any snow might be perceived as a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean in sense of their total seasonal accumulation that they are well off. They just have parts that are off to a fast start due to those two storms that have come through. But it is good for them to get those two storms that have come through, given the extreme fire issues they have faced as well. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have some products from the Climate Prediction Center, which is part of the NOAA's National Weather Service. These are the kind of 2-week outlook, and we do see some green finally making its way to California. And it expected that we actually do see that fall precip finally start to show up. The high pressure that's dominated our weather is finally starting to move a little bit to the west. This will allow storm systems to kind of slide down out of the Gulf of Alaska. Good news, those cold storms tend to produce a lot of snow.
Seems we lost Mr. Anderson. We'll see if his computer reconnects here in a moment. The joys of our modern life. While we give Mr. Anderson a moment to try to reconnect, are there any questions or comments from fellow board members to fill the space? And if Mr. Anderson doesn't able to connect here in a timely manner, we'll maybe shift over to Mr. Mubako to kind of close us out then. And apologize.
Sure, I'll ask a question. This is directed to Ms. White. Thank you, very much for your presentation, your updates on, reservoir operations and projections. I was, as we're hearing here, the kind of the climate forecasting, I was intrigued by your discussion of the drought toolkit. And I was just wondering, where is that in the development? You know, how do you envision that being deployed? And I know at the Water Board here, we've got a number of initiatives underway to try and better prepare for drought. And so I think just hearing from sister agencies, you know, how it's going on your end and how we can work better together is something I'm interested in.
Sure, and that's definitely the goal of this effort. So we really just started it. I think we kicked it off last month. Started pulling ideas, looking at potential definitions of what might define the conditions where we would start looking at those actions, and started to pull together what the actions might look like. So I think we're still pretty early in the development, but it is a multi-agency effort with our state and federal fishery partners, as well as the state board staff is included in that. So we hope that it'll be a very robust toolkit, and I think we're aiming for early next year to complete it. Of course, it may be completing it while using it if we're going into a drought year, but I think that's our plan right now.
And thank you, Board Member McGuire, for the good question. And thank you again, Ms. White, for joining us. On follow-on to that, is the toolkit meant to, excuse me, be sort of a list of policy options or a process that would be sort of triggered or engaged, or what are the sort of activities, you know, envisioned to be kind of within there?
Yeah, I think it's still under, we're still trying to figure out exactly what it's going to look like right now. But what I don't think it's going to be is a playbook for what to do in a drought. I think there's just too many different unique circumstances that we could be in a drought. So I think it'll be more of an options collection. I don't anticipate at this time that it'll be solely limited to the to policy options by reclamation and DWR. I think the intent is for it to be a little bit wider. As we know, during the drought, we all have to work together on figuring out how to solve problems. But we're still very early in the process of putting that together.
Well, really great to hear about it. There is complementary work I know going on at the board when it comes to our own processes, you know, the TUCP, the temporary urgency change petitions that might be brought to the board in various circumstances. You know, this year, given the dry conditions, as you've heard, we've engaged in some work actually around in the Russian River watershed, Sonoma Water County folks with some of that. So thank you for that. And Mr. Anderson, I see you're back. But
I am back. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. These things, this is again the flavor of life now in the modern world. So no, we're in the least. We were just spending time with discussion with Ms. White. So
very good.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. So there we see the temperature outlook for the next 2 weeks, and we see that cooler signature as that cold air pushes in out of the Gulf of Alaska. Next slide. All right, so in the eastern tropical Pacific, La Nina is present. That means the sea surface temperatures are cooler than average. They're about 1.5 degrees Celsius below average, which gets that down into the moderate to strong. Pretty much expect that to last through our winter. And what that does is that changes the circulation that we see in the atmosphere, where instead of kind of a straight west-east flow, we see more of a looping signature with a high pressure system somewhere in the Pacific. Where that high pressure is really important into what we see here in California. If it's where it's been of late, we get warm and dry. If it moves to the west, as it's working on doing right now, we start to see those cold storms come in. If it happens to move up to the northwest and allows a strong atmospheric river with tropical signature come in, that's when we get wet and have the potential for flooding. You see from Nevada, the DEWS program, which is a drought early warning system. It's part of the National Interagency Drought Information System, or NIDIS. Their outlook suggests that we are looking at a below average season there in the California and Nevada. Next slide. All right, so before we get to kind of the way I look at a water year, which is there on the screen for you, let you know that the Department of Water Resources has spent some time developing a collaborative for seasonal outlook and seasonal forecasting. We have members from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, NOAA's Earth Systems Research Lab, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, UCLA, UC Irvine, and Scripps Institution of Oceanography all working together, and collectively they're meeting at this time on the Winter Outlook Workshop, which I switched over from their talks to meet with you. What I have seen, they're all pretty consistent in terms of everybody's different methods of forecasting. So looking here at fall, it being the months of October and November, the start of the water year, we really look for when that precipitation onset happens. Then look at that temperature anomaly and look at the soil moisture state as snowpack begins to set in. Those are all kind of our important precursors before we get to the main event, December, January, February. On average, half our water year precip shows up in this 90-day window. What are dry notable anomalies? We can, what we're finding is we don't necessarily have kind of a consistent pattern through the entire winter anymore. We tend to see a lot of variability. And then in spring, we have those March miracles or the late season bailouts, and then figuring out where that peak snowpack timing and magnitude are going to lie. Historically, on average, about April 1st. And you see a lot of water management geared around that date. Let's go to the next slide. And here we are. Here's why I developed and a few caveats. One, with this collaborative, we're trying to be more specific in our outlooks, noting that we look at the information we see, we try and be specific, and then go back and diagnose where we went wrong to hopefully better understand the signals that we're looking at. It's reason for the caveat there at the bottom. Haven't shown demonstrative skill yet to make actions based on this outlook. So back in early October, when I started doing these outlooks, I said late start to the precipitation onset, but before Thanksgiving. Last year, we actually waited until Thanksgiving before that system came in. And it does look like in this coming week, we are seeing that pattern change that might open the door to that fall precip. However, because that's a cold storm, you will have dry soils for your snowpack initiation. That means even if we do get to 100% of average snowpack, it may not be 100% of average runoff because you have to satisfy that underlying dry soil structure. It certainly is dry from a record hot summer and a previous dry year. That said, I do think you're going to find more sunny days than not this winter, and that we will be chasing average. With a little asterisk there, that subseasonal variability, working with the folks that really look at that, looks like December and February may offer chances where we have things aligned where things could be windows of wet opportunities with that high pressure not really anchoring in one place all winter, but moving around. So depending how wet those wet episodes are, you might have that opportunity where at least for a brief time, you may be above average. And to kind of give you a year to think about, think of water year 2015 in December. We had an exceptionally strong atmospheric river come in December. Did provide some opportunity to offset some of the storage deficits in the reservoirs. I did have another significant atmospheric river in February, ended up in a dry year overall. And that was a year, unfortunately, because those were warm atmospheric rivers, no real snowpack developing. Overall, in years like this, spring precip tends to shut off early. So not likely to get those late season bailouts, although again, in a warmer world, history's proving to be less of a guide. But we do see that spring warm up in La Nina type years tend to kick in fairly soon. All that said, probably be below 75% of average on April 1 on the snowpack. And just to give you a sense, climatologically, 9 of the past 20 years have been in that category. So not entirely unusual for the 21st century to be in this region. Next slide. All right, that's it for me. Any questions?
Just thank you so much for taking your time. I know you have an incredibly busy schedule. I was just going to remark and just say thank you for the continued leadership when it comes to this seasonal and sub-seasonal outlook that's so critical, you know, and acknowledge, I know, Janine Jones's long work in continuing to get the agencies together on the federal side and on the state side with DWR's technical expertise to really be pushing for these sorts of forecasts so that it can really inform water management. And there, I guess I just have a question around, I know Daniel Swain from UCLA and others have done research around just the increase in what they call climate whiplash, right? You know, these really huge shifts. And I think we even saw some of it in our discussion here. I think California has always historically had a very sort of flashier dry system, but you know, the extremes in those as they sort of grow, what does it mean, I guess, for the sorts of forecasting we need, the work that you're doing, Mr. Anderson, and just if you have any thoughts or comment around that. Oh, here, make sure you should be able to unmute.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliments, and yeah, it is good work. Yes. In conversations with Daniel Swain, this whiplash or kind of that large swing, it's not so much now to tell you whether the whole winter is going to be wet or dry, but really understanding that within season variability, those windows where you might be wet for a brief period within a backdrop of overall dryness in terms of your seasonal accumulation, and really understanding how that impacts our systems. And so really, like I said, working with some of the folks, not only looking at what can we say about a whole season, but really understanding those windows of opportunity where we might have those windows of wetness that may show up. And so we're putting a lot of investment in that area right now with that in mind, that kind of whiplash motion is certainly a characteristic that seems to be more present.
Yeah, and I guess it can ultimately be opportunities for water managers to take advantage of a circumstance or not draw down, as the case may be. I think in some of the applications we've seen with Sonoma County and Mendocino Lake.
Right, really to try and leverage the information in the forecasts to make better use of that knowledge to do better with the water that we have and the infrastructure that we have.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it. Mr. Mubako.
Yeah, we are going to end this hydrology presentation by providing an overview of groundwater conditions in the next 3 slides. Next slide, please. The 1-year change map that we are looking at shows that the spring of 2020, in the spring of 2020, groundwater levels were lower in general than the previous spring. So in short, spring 2020 groundwater measurements show approximately that 22% of statewide well measurements decreased by at least 5 feet, 63% measured little change, and the remaining 15% increased by 5 feet or more. Next slide, please. This is another 1-year change map that we are looking at, showing how 2019 wet conditions affected groundwater levels. Runoff resulting from that wet water year filled reservoirs and contributed to recovering groundwater levels when compared to historical spring 2018 levels. Next slide, please. This one shows the 10-year change, spring 2010 to spring 2020. This change year, 10-year change map, it illustrates how some groundwater basins have not fully recovered to pre-drought conditions. Specifically in the Central Valley, Sacramento River, San Joaquin River, and Tulare Lake hydrologic regions, where about 40 to 70% of well measurements show a decrease in groundwater levels. In general, the groundwater storage recovers from drought more slowly than does reservoir storage, and deep confined aquifers in severely depleted groundwater basins may show no appreciable recovery because they do require a very long time to recharge. This will be the end of our hydrologic presentation, and we'll take any questions if they're there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mubako. Questions for any of the panelists from other fellow board members? I just appreciate the comprehensiveness of the hydrologic update. This was really helpful, especially this moment at the beginning of the water year as we try to prepare ourselves for what we know is always a bit of an unpredictable circumstance for us here in California, but we have to be prepared for whether they're wetter conditions or drier. And I think here at the Water Board for us, it's a sensitivity certainly in the context of water rights, but also, as we see with the long-term groundwater levels and the time it takes for them to recharge, these dry periods continue to have these, I think, cumulative effects throughout the years here, and of interest and importance to our programs on the drinking water side, certainly in other ways. So this was very helpful. Appreciate the thoroughness of it, and open it to any board members for question or comment. And if we're hearing none, that is fine too. And just appreciate then, Mr. Mubako, the good work on this. And then also all of our colleagues at the Department of Water Resources, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and just thank you. I thought this was very well done. I look forward to further discussion. Oh, thank you, Mr. Loffer. We do have, I forget, one speaker card here. And so I would ask Chris Malin to come up and provide comment. Sorry, didn't mean to transition prematurely.
Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, I was wondering if one of the speakers could address the soil structure issue in terms of how it impacts, how the soils react based on long-term drought, and maybe say a little more about that for the public, because it's kind of a new issue for me, and I'm seeing it in Napa that the soils are extremely dry, and I think they played a part in the fires because I think the vegetation didn't have the moisture in the soil levels and caused the landscapes to be more brittle. And I live in the rural mountains of Atlas Peak, and I garden and farm, and I could see the soils lifting and not holding the little bit of water at the beginning. So I wonder if you could speak a little more to that.
Thank you, Ms. Malin. I believe Mr. Anderson touched on it a bit or just briefly at least, when it came to impacts to snowpack ultimately, and what actually results in runoff in the Sierra. I believe Mr. Anderson may have had to go back to the previous engagement who was engaged on. He was probably the best person to speak to it. I don't know if I could offer up any of our staff that want to remark on the issue of dry soils, but there generally, I'll just say that droughts certainly dry out the landscape in ways that have lasting impacts when it comes to the next precipitation events that we have, where the land itself has to, before any of that becomes runoff, before it fills streams, before it fills our reservoirs, before it seeps into the ground, it has to rehydrate all of that dry and parched vegetation. When we have long consecutive dry years, we get tree mortality, to your point, and it really does stress the landscape and lead to then things like wildfire. And so I think climate change, the increasing temperatures, which further dries out and creates these conditions, is what is of great concern here. And that I think this year, particularly with our wildfires, we're seeing the consequence, along with what we know are complex dynamics on the ground. But what we do see, what we saw today in today's presentation, is that we're getting warmer. That is drying out our landscapes further and making it harder when we do have precipitation and we have these rain events, to pull out from the drought because of the deficits that are created on the landscape scale. And so just kind of leave it with that. And again, I think Mr. Anderson had to depart to another, back to his other engagement. So thank you for the question, Ms. Milan, and for your engagement today.
Thank you for your additional information. It was helpful. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Ms. Malin. Okay, with that, I believe we can conclude our hydrologic update item and brings us to our fifth, just doing a time check. Yes, our fifth informational item, which is the Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience, our SAFER program, Aquifer Risk Map, which was required by statute in SB 200. And I think Emily Houlihan might be leading us, or well, Scott and Emily. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and fellow board members. Yeah, and thanks for your attention to this informational item on the Aquifer Risk Map. So I am Scott Seifried. I'm the Chief of the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment, or GAMMA, unit at the Division of Water Quality. And like you mentioned, my co-presenter is Emily Houlihan, who's a staff geologist and has been doing the lion's share of work on this project. We also have John Borkovich, who's the section leader for the groundwater monitoring section for the Division of Water Quality, to answer any questions you might have, particularly any difficult questions could go straight to John. And I also want to give a shout out a staff member who has contributed to this project, but not here presenting, is Dory Bellin, who offered her expertise with data management and particularly on the creation of the web application that we hope to demonstrate this morning. So our presentation here is about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on any interaction, which is welcome. I have about 5 or 10 minutes of introduction to sort of set the background for this project. And then I'll turn it over to Emily, who has about a 20-minute sort of PowerPoint presentation on the methodology that went into making this map. We wanted to get that across, sort of a medium deep dive into the methods behind it. And then we hope to be able to do a live demonstration of the map to stress that it is, we call it a map, but it's really a data analysis tool and web application. So internet be willing, we'll be able to do a demonstration, and that'll put Emily on the spot a little bit, but we'll see how that goes. Next slide. So I just wanted to try to illustrate kind of where the Division of Water Quality and our work fits into the larger SAFER program. You see Division of Financial Assistance and DDW and Office of Public Participation. Where we fit in is, as you know, we don't regulate domestic wells and have light regulation of state small systems. And as a result, to assess risk of domestic wells and state smalls, we don't have the benefit of a data set for what those wells, what kind of water quality they're producing. And so to assess the risk of those systems, we have a different approach. We use our data that we have for groundwater, and the key is to try to focus the analysis on groundwater that those wells might be accessing as a proxy. So we do an analysis of the groundwater quality that we have in our GAMMA database and our GAMMA scientists, and make a map, and then essentially overlay our understanding of where domestic and state small systems are on that map as a way to arrive finally at an assessment of the risk of to those systems.
Scott, sorry to interrupt, but GAMMA, if you could explain for folks what GAMMA is.
Sure. GAMMA stands for Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment. The program was started up in around year 2000 with a mission to assess the ambient groundwater quality in California. Okay, and we have, very briefly, kind of two prongs where we team up with the United States Geological Survey to do a systematic assessment of groundwater in California. And then on our side, the staff side focuses on harvesting available groundwater quality data and integrating it into a database, and then making that data available to the public and other units. Good. Okay, thank you. Yeah. There's collaboration partners I wanted to focus on. We have been communicating with OEHA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and UC Berkeley, the Water Equity Science Group over on the far right. And then just to the left of UC Berkeley, the Department of Water Resources, and we might touch on that more depending on questions. Next slide. So the requirements in SB 200 are fairly straightforward. The language it says there, by January 1st, 2021, and that's what's been driving this project this past year, that deadline. The state board is to make a map of aquifers that are at high risk of containing contaminants that exceed safe drinking water standards and that are likely to be used as a source of drinking water for state small systems or domestic well. And that second clause is important in our analysis to try to focus on that shallower groundwater quality. The other key point here is the map is to be updated annually. So what you'll see is, Aquifer Risk Map 1.0, and it's going to be an evergreen map to be released annually. Next slide. The other important part of this is, the map is to be publicly accessible, and so that has driven a lot of the outreach we've done. Perhaps one of the big functions of this map is to provide a data analysis tools for the Division of Financial Assistance to inform them as they make their funding decisions in the fund expenditure plan. That's sort of the main use of it as we see, but also as specified by SB 200, it's available to the public, and we hope to have it be useful for that purpose as well. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the timeline, the work we've put into it this year. We've held 3 webinars. And when I say we, I mean Office of Public Participation has been tremendously helpful in these webinars, basically running them for us. That's been really great work. And for 2 of them, we teamed up with Division of Drinking Water as it was kind of a safer workshop day, and we had about half of it. The last one was solo on our part on October 9th. And so this also just shows you the overall timeline. Here we are November 4th. And again, we've been driven by the regulatory deadline of January 1st, 2021 to make the map available to the public. Next slide. In addition to the 3 public workshops, we also, at direction from John Borkovich and then executive management, really reached out the last few months to targeted outreach to these groups that are listed here. I mentioned OEHA and WES. We had multiple conversations with them through this process, sort of comparing notes technically and coordinating that way. The Department of Water Resources outreach and coordination is with the CDAG, that drought tool effort that they have, and how our water quality work can interface with their drought work. We've had a couple of very good interface meetings with the Central Valley Board staff and CV Salts, and how this map compares to their assessments of water quality and how they might use it, and very good overall outreach and coordination here. I won't go down all the bullets, but if there's questions, we can answer them. Next slide. So this is, in a way, it's a straightforward project. And when you get into the weeds of the data that Emily will, it's complicated. But the goal is to prepare this map depicting relative risk. Item 2 is what's important and different from previous work on this, is to focus on that shallower domestic well depth groundwater. And then the third one, and Emily might touch on this more, is that we want this tool to be able to interface with other efforts. And really, we're specifically mentioning the DWR County Drought Risk Tool. And so that you can take our groundwater quality risk and integrate it with an equally important, or some say a more important, factor of drought and declining water levels. So item 3 was a goal that we added to, do what we can to get even this first version of the map able to talk to other similar efforts.
I'll just quickly say I really do appreciate that particular point. You know, I think we here at the board recognize particularly that you have to talk about quality and quantity in the same. You can't, you know, they're not really separable. And so doing that crosswork with Department of Water Resources around the quantity side is just really appreciated. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. I think I just have a couple more introduction slides. Let's see, what's the next slide here? You know, this work, this aquifer risk map work follows sort of a one-time analysis where in a similar fashion, we did groundwater data quality analysis and fed it into another effort. In this case, it was DDW's work on the needs assessment. That was that one-time assessment of potential costs associated with providing, you know, implementing the human right to water in essence. And in this case, we, you know, did this similar kind of analysis that had a different goal, and we provided that analysis to DDW and their consultants. They're using it as part of their cost basis for their work. It was very related, kind of a one-time effort. And then the last slide I have, it did result in that previous work. Could I see the next slide? Is it just me, or are we stuck on the, oh, here we go. So sorry about that. The previous work did result in a statewide assessment of risk. Again, a slightly different goal. This map that you're seeing did get into the 2020 fund expenditure plan at DFA. So with this, I will turn it over to Emily Houlihan, who will walk us through the methodology involved behind this web application. Emily?
Thanks, Scott. Next slide, please. So yeah, my name is Emily Houlihan, and I'll be giving an overview of the data that is behind the aquifer risk map, how we created the map, and then internet permitting, I'll hopefully give a quick demonstration of what the map looks like and how it can be used. So I'll start with how we calculated water quality risk, and later I'll explain how we identified those areas that are most likely to be used by state smalls and domestic wells. So at the very highest level, the way we calculated water quality risk was we took existing data in the Gamma GIS system from wells that have water quality data. We applied a depth filter to these wells to isolate wells that best represent the groundwater accessed by domestic wells and state small systems. We declustered this point data to square mile sections to account for variability in sampling. We then aggregated this square mile section data to calculate risk scores for census block groups, which is our final level of aggregation. I'll just note here that we used census block groups mainly for thinking about future compatibility with other data sources, including demographic information, but mainly the Department of Water Resources drought assessment tool, which also calculates drought risk by census block groups. So that's the main reason we use census block groups. Next slide, please. So all of this information I'm going to talk about is explained in much more detail in a couple of white papers. And also we have the data processing scripts available. So if anybody is interested in much more detail, we do have those available. At a high level, the data processing involved taking publicly available data from both public and domestic wells, filtering those wells by depth, and then declustering the data to account for sampling variability. We looked at both long-term averages, which encompassed the last 20 years, going up through January 1st, 2020. We also looked at recent results, which is all results from wells within the past 2 years, again, through January 1st, 2020. We looked at all constituents with an MCL, including a couple of extra constituents that don't have an MCL but are important for groundwater quality concerns, specifically hexavalent chromium. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of how we use the depth filter to identify wells with water quality data that best represent the water quality, the groundwater accessed by domestic wells and state small water systems. We used well construction data from the Department of Water Resources OSCR database, which is the online system for well completion records. We know that wells, especially domestic wells, might be different depths across the state. So we did our depth filter analysis per groundwater unit. And groundwater units are just basically basins and upland portions of the state that identify areas of similar hydrogeologic conditions. And you can see the outlines of the groundwater units on the map on the right. So for each groundwater unit, we looked at the well construction data for domestic wells in that area, and we used some statistics to calculate a domestic minimum and a domestic maximum. And we only used water quality data from wells that fell within that depth range. However, unfortunately, a lot of the water quality data that we have comes from wells with unknown depths, or the depth just is not reported in our system. So we came up with a way to use this depth filter to look at well type. And for that, for each groundwater unit, we compared the depth of public wells with the depth of domestic wells. Where public and domestic wells access approximately the same depths, we did include public wells as a proxy for domestic well water quality. That is shown in the orange areas on the map on the right. In areas where public and domestic wells are accessing different depths, where the public wells are much deeper than domestic wells, we did not include public well water quality data in this map. Next slide, please. So once we had the depth filter data from well points, we did some declustering, again, to account for variability and spatial sampling. I won't go through all of this. We'll just point out some key facts. So we looked at both the long-term average and recent results, which we aggregated differently because they're different types of numbers. One is an average and one is a count. Additionally, we had a little bit of a different method based on how close an area was to a well with water quality data. For square mile sections that contained a well with water quality data, we took the average from wells in that section. And for sections that did not contain water quality data, but were adjacent to sections that did, those sections received the average of neighboring sections. This is based on the idea that the closest available water quality data will be the best estimate of water quality at any given point, even if you don't have data at that exact location. For this aquifer risk map, we did not extrapolate the exact water quality estimations any further than neighboring sections. However, we did do the final aggregation step at census block groups, which provides a statewide water quality risk assessment. Next slide, please. So just to pause here, this image shows a comparison of our declustered nitrate data compared to a couple of other studies that also looked at nitrate estimations, specifically in the Central Valley. On the left are the CV salts estimations for the upper zone, so nitrate in the upper zone that might be accessed by domestic wells. In the middle is the results from a USGS study in 2018, Ransom et al., that used machine learning to also estimate nitrate concentrations in the Central Valley. And on the right is the section level nitrate data for this analysis, the aquifer risk map analysis. I know that all of these maps have different color schemes and a slightly different orientation, but hopefully you can see that the large scale areas that are identified as being likely over the MCL are generally the same for all three maps. We also did a little bit of numeric analysis that showed that our analysis, the aquifer risk map section data, fell right in between these other two estimates in terms of likely area that has nitrate above the MCL. Next slide, please. So now I'll explain how we took the declustered section data and used it to calculate water quality risk for census block groups. we looked at 5 different metrics of water quality data to capture different aspects of potential water quality risk. The first 2 metrics look at how many chemicals are potentially above the MCL or close to the MCL, within 80% to 100% of the MCL. In our analysis, more chemicals above or close to the MCL contribute to a higher overall risk. The third metric we looked at was the average magnitude of results above the MCL. And again, higher magnitude contributed to higher final risk. The last 2 metrics look at the percent area of a census block group that has chemical concentrations estimated to be above the MCL or close to the MCL. And again, more area that fits this criteria contributes to higher overall risk. Next slide, please. We calculated a final water quality score for each census block group using this equation. I won't go through it all, but basically we reduced the impact of metrics that dealt with chemical constituents that were just close to the MCL, emphasizing those chemicals that are above the MCL. The final scores are converted to percentiles to make it a little bit easier to understand. The percentiles go from 0 to 100, and also to provide the relative risk of all areas. Again, this is just based on the kind of data we have available. We're just comparing, we're saying what the data looks like in a certain area relative to the rest of California. Next slide, please. So now I'll turn to how we identified areas where people are likely accessing groundwater via domestic wells or state small water systems. For this, we looked at the density of both of these wells. Specifically, we again turned to the Department of Water Resources OSCAR dataset, and we looked at the count of domestic wells. And one thing to note here is we excluded wells that were drilled prior to 1970 to account for wells that might no longer be in use. We also used state small water system locations provided by RCAC, the Rural Community Assistance Corps, which was useful in identifying where state small locations are. Next slide, please. We combined the domestic well count and the count of state small water systems per census block group and divided it by the area of the census block group to get a sense of system density. This density was converted again to percentiles just to normalize the values and make them a little bit easier to understand. Next slide, please. So finally, both of these different aspects of the aquifer risk map, the water quality and the system density, are combined to make a final risk score that identifies areas that both have water quality that maybe does not meet primary contaminant levels and also has a high likelihood of being used by domestic wells or state small water systems. Next slide, please. This just shows how we calculated that final risk. We just added the water quality percentile to the domestic well and state small system density percentile. This final combined risk is again converted to a percentile just for easier understanding and to normalize the scores. So next slide, please. At this point, I will attempt to share my screen and give you a demonstration of what the actual map looks like. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen, and this shows the initial view of the risk map. This is the splash screen that just gives you a little bit of context of what this map was created for, what its intended use is, and a little bit of background on what the data behind it is. Again, we also include links to the extensive documentation that gives the detailed methodology behind this map, and the data processing scripts are available via GitHub. So the colors of this map correspond to the percentiles that I was just talking about. Red and warmer colors indicate areas that have higher percentiles, which corresponds to higher potential risk for water quality and for likelihood of use by domestic wells and state small water systems. I'll start with just showing a little bit of the data that you can get by looking at individual census block groups. And specifically, I'll start with water quality, and then I'll show you the combined risk. So it may take a minute to load as I zoom in here. So the legend on the left allows you to turn on and off different layers, which is useful if you're interested in potentially different aspects of this aquifer risk map. So I just turned off the combined risk and I turned on the water quality risk. So if you click on an individual census block group, you can see both the exact water quality risk percentile that we assigned to the census block group and all the data behind it, so why it gives the score it does. For this specific census block group, you can see that it has a very high water quality risk percentile. It's in the 96th percentile, which just means that relative to other areas in California, it has a very high potential risk for water quality not meeting maximum contaminant level standards. And you can see why it gets that high percentile. It has multiple chemicals above the MCL, multiple chemicals close to the MCL, a high average magnitude, and a high percent area containing chemical constituents above or close to the MCL. You can also see the specific constituents that are contributing to that risk. And if you're not sure what these abbreviations mean, there's each translation table at the end of our aquifer map methodology documentation that explains the full name of these chemical constituents. One thing I'll also point out here is that in addition to that metadata, we also include a value that shows you the percent of data coverage that we have for each census block group, which can give you a sense of the confidence that you can have in that result. It's not exact, but it just can tell you where we have more data and where we have less data. So for this census block group, we have 92% data coverage, which is fairly good. So now I'll compare it with a different census block group to give you a sense of how the individual risk metrics contribute to a final score. This census block group up here, it's in the upland portion of Tulare County, and it's in a much lower water quality risk percentile. This is because it has less chemicals above or close to the MCL, lower magnitude, but most importantly, it has a lower percent area containing chemical constituents above or close to the MCL. So to show you how you can dig a little bit further into this data, I'll just show you, and it's especially useful for large census block groups, but in addition to this aggregated census block group score, we also provide the well point and declustered section data that I was mentioning earlier. So you can turn the census block group layer off and you can look at the individual data, which can give you a really good sense of where we have wells that have water quality data and what the, the very granular data looks like. So remaining on this census block group, even though the overall risk percentile was very low, you can see that there is potentially a water quality issue in this corner of the census block group, even though the majority of wells in that census block group don't have constituents above or close to the MCL. So now I'll show you how we combine this water quality risk layer with the domestic well density state small system locations to create a final risk score. So I just turned off the water quality risk and I'll show you the state small system locations and the domestic well density. Might take a second to load. So what this layer is showing is it's showing the stars are the locations of state small water systems, and the color scheme shows you the density of domestic wells, again, from the OSCAR data set. So this just shows you where you have a high density of domestic wells, which is important for understanding where people might be accessing water via domestic wells or state small systems. So we can then turn the combined risk layer on, which again just adds the water quality percentile to the likelihood of exposure, giving you a sort of overall risk metric. So if we zoom in and click on the census block group we were looking at earlier, we can see that it has a combined risk percentile in the 89th percentile. And that's coming from that 96th percentile water quality risk. And it's in the 21st percentile for exposure. So exposure just stands for, domestic well and state small system density, the likelihood that users are accessing groundwater via those methods. We also provide a little bit of metadata showing you the population, the disadvantaged community status of the area of the census block group, and the estimated count of domestic wells and state smalls. Again, this map is only as good as the data we have, and we know that there may be some issues with the data that's coming in, but this is our best guess based on available data. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I mean, that really concludes what we wanted to present this morning and get across. And we can just open it up to any comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Scott. And particular thanks to you, Ms. Houlihan, when it comes to just your very professional engagement. And I heard how you've handled yourself very well when it came to the webinars and the very technical questions and comments that were coming around the tool. And just really appreciate the great work that's gone into making this into a really valuable tool and well thought through, along with so many of our partners. And so again, just want to acknowledge the work with the Department of Water Resources as well on this and its broad importance and application to so much of the decision making that's going on throughout the state, whether it's a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, whether it's our Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, the SAFER program. All of these programs are benefited and ultimately grow to their best potential because of these data points. These are the foundations of good decision making, and appropriately synthesizing this, I hope, is going to be a tool that is continued to be used and referenced, especially as we update it yearly with many of our county and local stakeholders. And so look forward to continuing to message the opportunity to use this as a data set, an authoritative data set that really does provide the best technical information out there for these considerations around water quality as we manage our groundwater resources. So thank you. I don't think I have much further question, just appreciate again the good work. And any thoughts and questions from fellow board members around this?
I will say thank you. Also, I'm so excited about this. It is a huge amount of work and a huge tool for the state. We were reflecting on this yesterday, but this is such, we've come so far in our state from, being scared to share any information on private wells or do any studies to try to identify where there's problems to actually, seeking out and sharing in a very transparent and open way the data that we have, how we can integrate, local and new data on an ongoing basis and continue to just share a really vital tool for all of us in the state, whether it's individuals that live in these areas, local water managers or water decision makers or local agencies, and certainly at the state level and regional boards. I think this is just a huge resource and one that I think, I love how we can continue to build on and continue to improve and continue to incorporate more and better data as we get it. And a great example of the kind of shared open data work to recognize that there's expertise and data sources from all different areas, and we need to be able to integrate and overlay them to help support, good decision making. And I think just, I really personally want to help support how we make sure that folks know about this and are able to utilize it, whether it's, again, individual homeowners, local planning agencies or water managers. I know this is very much already integrated and is part of the SAFER program, and therefore a lot of the technical assistance and outreach and testing that's going on there. But and I know you've been coordinating with regional boards as well. So excited about this, appreciate all of the work, and look forward to helping to support getting the tool out, getting feedback, and helping to continue to make it even more useful.
Hear, hear. Thank you, board member. Anyone else with thoughts or questions? Hearing none, again, just thank you, Ms. Houlihan, then for the incredible presentation, incredible work. Looking forward to, as board member Firestone said, continued opportunity for engagement around this tool and the work. So just thank you, and thank you as well to Scott and everyone else I know that is, and Mr. Borkovich as well. Just incredible leadership over on the groundwater quality side. So thank you. All right, well, that concludes our informational items, and that was item number 5. And again, thank you so much. So brings us to item number 6, board member reports. Quickly, I will pull up a calendar just so I can reference. Each day bleeds into the next. I can go ahead and start here for us. Actually, just yesterday, I moderated a panel. The California Water Association had their annual conference and was very fortunate to moderate a great discussion, especially on so critical a day as Election Day, to talk about what is really a nonpartisan issue. And on the panel was Katie Henderson from the U.S. Water Alliance, Ellen Hannick from the PPIC, Jim Wunderman from Bay Area Council, and also had Jonathan Reeder, who is a securities analyst for Wells Fargo, to talk about some of and we talked about the COVID impacts, economic downturn, and the opportunities really that exist. And want to acknowledge we also, and I know board member Firestone will cover this, so I won't cover too much, but we had a fantastic joint workshop with the California Public Utilities Commission around some of this general theme. You all heard us talk earlier today, obviously, about the data gathering exercises we're under to help put a finer point on some of the need out there. And so it was, I felt fortunate to be able to moderate the program. It was a good discussion, and want to again thank California Water Association for pulling that together. Let's see, and then quickly, I apologize for doing this on the fly. There was a Cutting the Green Tape event on the 29th that I participated with Secretary Crowfoot and Secretary Ross and Deputy Secretary Norris from the Resources Agency around trying to streamline some of our permitting processes when it comes to ecological restoration. You all, I think, are aware, very much aware, that we've been working for a couple of years now, actually, with this sustainable conservation and other partners to figure out how we permit, create what's known as a general order. Projects that are permitted usually go to the regional boards. With general orders, we create a statewide permit and allows for some optimization ultimately of our requirements. And so that effort in the next year we're looking to launch. It was good to discuss the other ways that the Cutting the Green Tape initiative has some recommendations for some of that work, and appreciated the invitation from Secretary Crowfoot to share a few thoughts and words in that space, and just thank, more importantly, our program staff who are engaged in some really incredible streamlining. And streamlining is really not the right word. It's maximizing these outcomes that we want in these sorts of projects. And so just, I think those are the two major things I've mentioned as part of my update, and see if any other board members here have anything they'd like to report.
Maybe I'll follow that, since you touched on the joint hearing with the CPUC. I wanted to just share some more of that, because we've talked about, there's so much that we're doing on this. I think this was really building on actually a few years of work of joint hearings around affordability that we've done, but also even more close coordination that we've been doing with the CPUC around drinking water affordability and drinking water solutions more generally, to have coordination on that. And it was really great to get an overview from the data that the Class A, the large investor-owned utilities, have already provided, and regularly updating the CPUC on that. You know, just from that, you know, one takeaway was that the total arrearages were up 117% from last year. So very large increase. We know that, but you know, I think it was helpful to see what they're learning from the sample that they have, which is relatively small in the state, but also learning what kinds of additional information would be helpful to understand the problem better. One thing that I heard was some of the requirements that the CPUC has put on their systems, just to, you know, kind of as reference to us to understand, was that they required that systems, and I think this is just for the large investor-owned utilities, but they required that customers be given the option of partial payment plans for at least 12 months period. And they required systems to automatically enroll customers in the customer assistance programs through data sharing from the Energy Cares program. You know, I think some big takeaways from overall that I had were, you know, there's great things going on at the local level in terms of best practices. And that's true both with large systems like LADWP and SFPUC, but also in some of the more moderately sized systems like Santa Ana, and especially Santa Ana and LADWP were able to utilize some of the federal stimulus CARES money to support assistance around utilities and particularly water. So hearing some of that, also hearing what other states have been doing around this. Illinois had a particularly good model that people talked about, and also what kinds of policies have been in development in the energy sector, you know, that may or may not be relevant to the water sector. Obviously, there's a huge amount of differences, but interesting to hear, I think, some of the sort of creative ways of financing, maybe like securitizing the debt for allowing more flexibility and stretching out payment plans. You know, another takeaway for me was, in addition to just how we support and facilitate best practices and learn from each other, but also looking at how we can support a full portfolio of financing tools. So clearly the biggest thing is we need money at a very high magnitude. And I think we all are hoping that that could come from the federal government, and that we can, you know, really have a strong and unified voice for how that what we need, and also how we can use that if and when it comes. But also just thinking about how there's other kind of creative funding mechanisms that we might look at for, especially for systems where Prop 218 is a challenge. So things like securitizing debt forgiveness, or adjustments to allow kind of more flexible funding that systems could use for being able to fund customer assistance programs in extreme cases, especially, and give more flexibility to publicly owned systems than they would otherwise have with their funding sources. And finally, I wanted to just highlight this idea that of sharing data from that a number of the public agencies mentioned, it would be helpful for them to, be able to share data and access information on low-income customers that are already enrolled and sort of vetted as low-income within other customer assistance programs to be able to reduce the administrative burden on them for, being able to provide customer assistance programs within their service area. Definitely more work to come, and I think just a huge amount of great engagement and sort of diving into how are we getting a handle on this problem and what are options for us as we try to navigate a pathway forward. And then lastly, I just at the same time and the same day, unfortunately, it ended up this way. There was a workshop that staff held on the this sort of pilot for small water system rate dashboard, which is this really interesting tool that was rolled out. The Environmental Finance Center at UNC is sharing it on their website, but really encourage folks to take a look. If you weren't able to attend the webinar, there's still information on the website. And this was through the needs assessment and is really an opportunity for systems to be able to look at, this was focused on small systems, systems between, I think it was 500 to 33,000 or 3,300 connections. And understanding, are their rates covering their expenses? How can they understand their rates in different contexts to be a tool for these small systems, as well as customers and agencies and partners. So wanted to highlight those and take the opportunity to share some of that in the board report.
Thank you, board member. Others?
Yeah, I'll give an update. First of all, just want to thank everyone for the really good discussion at WQCC, and really want to thank James and others for their work on it in preparation. And I just wanted to call out in particular my interest in the regional board updates. I found that to be really helpful. And there was something about this Zoom format that I allowed for some creative displays. In particular, Region 2 had a really good one, and it just seemed more interesting than in the past, and an ability to highlight the issues. And so I'm interested in following up on some of the updates that were provided, and just really want to thank the regional boards for their good work on this. And then the only other thing I have to update is that on the 23rd, I kicked off a panel at CSU's Agricultural Research Institute. They have an annual forum, and this panel discussion was on water, and also participating in the panel was EDF, PPIC, and Ken and Michael from the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. And much of it was really focused on sort of the angst coming up about SGMA implementation and focusing on the potential impacts, both in the with respect to agriculture and communities that may be affected. And there was a really good discussion that EDF focused on the Cahuilla Basin. PPIC had a really good discussion on groundwater markets in the Mojave area. And there was a focus also on banking and discussion about the permits that many are seeking to obtain through the Water Board. And I just found the discussion to be really helpful, and really appreciated the collaborative tone that all of the participants had, and sort of a recognition of the challenges, and also not just with respect to agriculture, but disadvantaged communities. And just the seeing sort of a, well, just as I said, a collaborative tone in the discussion rather than kind of the usual sort of presentation. So it seems that folks from all sectors that are working on Sigma are really interested in rolling up their sleeves, and because of the many challenges that are going to be presented, much as we heard the other day in the rollout of PPIC's most recent report, just looking for real creative opportunities as a way to meet the challenges coming up.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you for your role in being a leader in creating that spirit, that space to be collaborative, to kind of open up and just acknowledge. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for acknowledging WQCC and the really good work. I completely forgot to make sure and include that. It was a great WQCC, and it was all because of the great work and that staff and put into it to really set ourselves up for a good event. For those of you that don't, WQCC is the Water Quality Coordinating Committee. It's our yearly convening of all us water boards members to discuss and go over the various issues that the regions are facing and some thematic issues. The big theme was obviously our shift to COVID here. And for those of you that might be even just passingly interested, the video is up and will remain up to be viewed if you'd like to see the discussion that went on amongst us board members. And it was a very productive one, and just want to thank everyone's participation in that. Sorry, second bite at the apple. Other board members.
That's not fair. So just a couple is, with all our discussion and obviously well-warranted focus on safe drinking water issues, I just wanted to flag a paper that was published recently, a few weeks ago, titled Solutions for Underperforming Drinking Water Systems. And that was spearheaded by Water Research Foundation, CUA, the Civic Institute. And actually, I haven't had a lot of chance to dive into the details there, but suffice to say, I just want to flag it has a whole series of recommendations for how to improve partnerships, look at regional opportunities to address drinking water challenges. It's a lot of what we're focused on now, a lot of what we talk about today. And just, I think it's good that, we have other organizations participating in this groupthink about what we can do and how we can best solve these problems. And so I brought this up in particular because I was part of the groupthink. I had the opportunity to sit in a one-day brainstorming session with this group. And I think also with Michelle Frederick, with Division of Drinking Water, and Leslie Loudon with Division of Financial Assistance. And we all got to put in our 2 cents and participate a bit in the discussion. So I'm looking forward to digging into this paper a little bit more and happy to share it if you haven't seen it and you're interested. And then, in addition to the accolades on WQCC and also the QC Water Board Joint Workshop, I really appreciated having the opportunity to attend that as well. I was able to see some of the presentations in the morning. So really a lot of great work, and just emphasizes, everything that we're doing here with the survey and need to continue pushing on. But I also wanted to mention that this morning, I attended a meeting with before our board meeting, with the Building Industry Association North State group. And we just had a conversation about waters as a state, wetland policy, and this really focused not on policy issues, but on implementation, right? On moving forward. They acknowledge and appreciate where the board landed with the policy adoption, and their ongoing interest is just to make sure that the process is efficient and streamlined. I think Chair Esquivel, akin to some of what you talked about in cutting the green tape for restoration projects, it's similar in that we have housing challenges in California, and want to make sure that we're doing recognizing our resource constraints. And I made sure to share with them some of the challenges we've been facing this year. But we are in the beginning stages of implementation of the waters as a state policy, and just want to make sure that's something we continue to pay attention to, that we identify where there are backlogs, where there are challenges in the early going here, that it's something we want to make sure we address effectively. So just wanted to flag that, and that's really all I have for today. Thanks.
I'll just chime in on heaping accolades on James and staff for WQCC. And also want to thank the chair and board member Firestone. I also attended the CPUC workshop. Thought it was very well done. A lot of great information. So I won't go into more detail. Board member Firestone did a great job of recapping it, but it certainly focused things really well on the challenge ahead with respect to that issue. So thanks.
Thank you all. Really appreciate that. Well, I believe that brings us to the end of today's board meeting before we go into closed session, at least. So one moment. Yep, that's about it. Just thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time and attention today. It concludes the meeting. We're adjourned until November 17th, or actually we're heading into closed session, so I don't think we're officially adjourned, Mr. Loffer, but otherwise, just thank you, everyone.
And I think what would be helpful, Chair Esquivel, is we are at about 12:25. I don't know if the board members would like to take a brief lunch break before we convene the staff and the separate platform for closed session, and then the board would be retiring into closed session, and then we'll announce the adjournment later today.
I think that would be very prudent. So we can plan on reconvening for closed session at 1 o'clock amongst us board members here. Okay.
Great. Thank you all.
We'll be recessed until then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the very productive morning. Take care.